We will now call today's Housing, Urban Development, and Zoning Committee to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Sanye. Alderman Browning. Chair Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Sanye. We have 3 present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes from Tuesday, November 28, 2023.
So moved.
Madam Clerk, we can call the roll.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderwoman Sanye. Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Sanye. You have 3 aye votes.
All right, with that, we have approved the minutes from Tuesday, November 28, 2023. We'll move on to item number 1, Board Bill number 129. Alderman Aldridge, you are accepted for presentation.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for allowing me to present to you this morning Board Bill 129. Board Bill 129 is a Chapter 99 development plan for 400 South 14th Street. It is a hotel that is located right south of us, right across the street from the Metro Center. It's probably known for its beautiful mural that sits on the outside. But however, this hotel has been going through some trials and tribulations with previous developers that have not really taken care of that hotel. So there is a developer here that will talk a little bit more about his plan, as well as SLDC, and I know we have a lot of condo owners, so I won't take up too much time, but the goal is to really put this hotel back on the map for St. Louis. This is a very beautiful hotel. As we know right now, St. Louis is a lot of times like talked about the negative, but I'm gonna talk about the positive. You know, St. Louis, she's doing really good. We got a lot of great opportunities coming with MLS that is here. They just recently also located their headquarters downtown. Anthem just announced that they have 250 jobs coming back to downtown. We've seen the renovation of Union Station. The Blues hopefully have a great season, but we know that when they play, it turns out a lot of people, as well as the MLS soccer stadium. So currently this is, like I say, it's a hotel, but it is also condos. So there's 71 condo owners that stay in this building, and I want to commend them and thank them for continuing to stick it out, especially as a hotel element of it has kind of gone downhill. But these condo owners, before I get into more of my presentation, I must say I had the opportunity yesterday to go visit the hotel and see it, and to meet with several condo owners that are here today. The condos are from the 9th floor to the 12th floor. Everything in between pretty much is hotel. There's a garage, I believe, on the 2nd and 4th floor, and on the 5th floor is hotel. Unfortunately, under the old ownership, they have let it go down so bad that the whole 5th floor is not even operable. So they have roughly 200 and I want to say 80 rooms, but they only have 110 rooms that they actually can rent out. And they need a lot of upgrade to these rooms. But these condo owners, when I say are doing everything possible to continue to stay there. I talked to many of them yesterday, say they love St. Louis. They could easily leave St. Louis, but they decided to be there. They continue to invest in their condo. They're working with the current hotel manager to have a partnership so that condo owners are kind of helping out with the hotel to take care of some of the needs that the hotel old developer haven't been able to do. But it is, and you'll hear some of these testimonies from some of these people today. They have been going through a lot, and they continue to stay there and have continued to try to fight it out, hoping that a developer would come and be able to not just help their quality of life, but they see the beauty also in this historic hotel getting upgraded, being able to not just be, the goal would be, it would be a hotel still with condos and also extended stay, so that people that are here on business trips can be able to stay here a little longer. I know there's been a lot of emails that have been sent. I've made sure that our clerk got all of people's personal testimony that wasn't able to make it in the drive. I know that members have also received emails from the union. I'm hopeful in the process working out, but I think it is extremely important today to hear personal stories from people that live in that building. And I hope that we can get to a place in this development where it actually moves forward, because, again, this would be a huge anchor that would only continue to uplift downtown. While downtown is kind of on the decreasing end, there's been a lot of things that show that there's hope still in our downtown area, understanding that downtown is a huge economic engine for the city of St. Louis. So with that, is like I say, we have some handouts that I have for committee members that talks a little bit about the project. Like I say, there's 71 condos. They're from the 9th to the 12th floor. The 12th floor currently is dealing with a lot of water leak because they have a sunroom. They also have a pool. Not being able to keep that upkeep of the hotel, that water leak has also damaged several condo owners' homes. They have personally made sure that they have fixed these leaks based on the lack of infrastructure that exists at the hotel. When you walk outside of the hotel, on both corners of the hotel, you can see foundation issues. There's cracks, there's bricks falling. It's in bad shape, and it needs a lot of help. And like I said, there's 288 rooms, but only 110 of them are operable right now. And this would be, if the hotel were to go into effect, this would also be a huge tax increase for the city of St. Louis. One, when it comes to hotel taxes, because they'll be able to upgrade these rooms where they actually have more people utilizing that. On the budget committee, we heard that one thing that is up in the city is hotel tax. If this hotel is upgraded, there'll be more money, but also personal property tax. Some of the things that the condo owners told me is that their personal property tax value has went down due to the state of how poor that the current hotel is. So if the hotel were to get a facelift, it's not only good for the residents, it's good for the city. It brings in money, not just on the hotel tax, but also on the personal property tax. Currently, one room right now in this hotel is range for about $70. It is a very low staying hotel just because of the quality that is there. The restaurants that was in the hotel have now left. I know there's future hopes if the development would happen to bring in sports bars and to bring in restaurants, not just for the people that stay there, but also people that would like to visit the hotel. So with that, Madam Chairwoman, I know we have SLDC here to talk more on the tax abatement element, as well as the developers to talk on the development of the project, and many people from the community as well. So I will stop my presentation.
Zach Wilson with SLDC. We're very excited about this project. As you know, this is kind of like the first thing many people see when they enter downtown from the south, especially off the Metrolink station and Greyhound station. I'm going to run this through. We have many speakers. So the renovation of 266 rooms is a huge plus for the city. 33 full-time positions, 47 part-time position, average wage is $59,000. So with any type of incentive deal, minority compliance is enforced. So minority firms will be receiving $4.9 million. Women-owned firms will be receiving $2.2 million. Also, prevailing wage will be enforced on this project also. We modeled it at 10 years at 75. I'll let Andrew and Jake go through the other additional scorecards.
All right, so first, for this to become eligible for incentive at all, it needs to score at least 30 points on the community benefits scorecard. So it does get to 30. making it eligible for 10 years at 80%. We're at 75%, as I just said. So the areas where it does get points is in job creation, so 33 full-time jobs, 47 part-time jobs estimated, so around 56 FTE. A little closer, okay, sorry. 8 points. Okay. It's great public transit access, so it's right near our city transit center, so MetroLink buses, all that. Just you can walk across the street. So 7 points. The total investment is just under $46 million, so 5 points there. Let's say those go up a little bit, it could get over $50 million, which would have got another point, but slightly irrelevant. It is a historic building built in 1928, so 5 points for preserving a historic structure. Job creation I talked about. This is located within our designated employment district in the city, so 5 points for creating jobs within that. And then I just pointed out here that it is located in Economic Justice Index area 5 area, so it gets 0 points from that. But from the other categories, it does get up to 30 points. It's a job creator, preserves a historic structure, very visible historic structure. Great public transit access for the users and also the employees. So with that, give it over to Jake to talk about the financials.
Yeah, so the financial implications from a tax revenue perspective from this property are significant. The hotel portion of the property has a current property tax bill of about $200,000. During the abatement period, we would expect that to increase to almost $350,000. And then after the abatement ends, that would be close to $850,000. We have a total fiscal benefit over 10 years to the city of $1.6 million, increasing to $4.3 million over 20 years, and benefit to the schools of $1.3 million, increasing to $6 million over 20 years. The decline of the building's condition is pretty evident, and the assessed value as well, which has decreased almost 50% since 2020. And almost 73% since 2014. So in the last 10 years alone, the property taxes have declined significantly, and the assessor is definitely recognizing the decline in condition of the.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes,
Okay, if you could state your name and what development company you're with.
absolutely. So I'm Doug Rasmussen. I'm the founder and CEO of Steadfast City Economic and Community Partners. We're a St. Louis City-based consulting firm. We advise community development corporations, businesses, real estate developers on various development-related concerns. We have and we do work for nonprofits as well. We've got a office at Jefferson and Cherokee Street on the 3rd floor of Nebula. And then I'm a 20-some-year resident of the city, live in Old North St. Louis. So know Alderman Aldridge well through that. And appreciate everybody's time here. I think actually the initial speakers did a very nice job of outlining the impact and the positive nature of this project. And I would just say that I had just moved here when the building was originally redeveloped, and to see this building, the potential for it to come back to life, I think is significant. There's good job creation, high wages. I think it's going to be a great job, or great project for both the construction labor force and the permanent labor force as well. And so I won't go on too much because I know we've got some speakers here, but David Robert, who is the CEO of Midas, is here. So I'd like to actually just bring David up to the podium and have him give a couple statements, and then keep the hearing moving. And I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thank you.
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
If you'll just state your name and your organization. Or
Hi, good morning. My name is David Robert. I'm the CEO of Midas Hospitality. we're not some out-of-town developer, guys. We're based here in St. Louis, and we appreciate the committee hearing our request. Our plan is to inject some $50 million into the Edison building. I know you guys know it. It's literally right across the street. The property currently is the home to some 71 condo owners, and they're literally watching this thing fall down around them. There also is a lower branded motel there. We're going to completely renovate this thing, including restoring the historic exterior mural. And we're going to upgrade it to an upscale Sheraton hotel. So it's a dramatic improvement in the hotel brand. We're going to add 50 apartments to the building, and we're going to reopen the restaurant on 14th and Spruce, so adding a restaurant downtown. The project, as we said, will be, Midas has multiple business. One of the business we own is Midas Construction, so we will be using union trades for this job. We also own a carpentry company that is 100% a union carpenter, so they will be doing work in the building as well. We've worked hard to make this project pencil, but we can't do it without the abatement. It's just too costly, and there's just too much deterioration in the. So we need your help. You know, we have and we invest in other cities, and we chose to invest in St. Louis because this is home. It is home for most of our 1,200 employees. We're trying to make a difference in the city for our employees and for their families. I've met with the neighbors, and I've made a commitment to help them. They're in a bad place, and we want to make their building better. I hope you see the value of our investment in the city and judge it on its own merit. We need your help to make St. Louis better. We really do. Thanks in advance for supporting our project.
That was all the presentation speakers that I had, Madam Clerk. So I'm here to, or Chairwoman. So I'm here either to answer questions, or if you want me to wait to the end and move on to the speakers who are here.
I think we'll begin with the speakers first. Madam Clerk.
Deborah Mayweather. If you'll raise your right hand, I'll just swear you in, and then state who you're with, your full name and who you're with, and then you'll have 3 minutes to proceed.
Okay. I'm sorry, actually, Madam Clerk, can we swear them all in at the same time? They come up, all they have to. Anyone who signed up to speak, you can raise your hand.
Speak with just raise your right hand.
I think just me.
I have 4 people. I have Debbie,
That's
David Evans, David Robert, you spoke, and Doug. Okay, you all spoke. Do you swear to tell or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
We do.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Debbie Mewherter, and I've lived in the Edison condominiums for 7 years, and am currently the president of our Edison Board of Directors. We don't live in the Edison condominiums. We live in the Edison community. Tucked away in the 400 South 14th Street building are 71 condos with over 100 people who have created a diverse neighborhood of people who truly care about each other and the city of St. Louis. Sorry. 7 years ago, my husband and I moved from a rural town in northern Illinois to retire in St. Louis and enjoy the city life. The Edison condos were very appealing because we could downsize our living accommodations while having access to hotel rooms for our families and guests. Well, since our purchase, we have watched the building deteriorate, criminal activity around our building and in our building increase, and guess what? The condition of the hotel rooms has become really terrible, and the clientele has become very unsavory and suspicious. We do not want our family and friends to stay in that hotel. We've even heard it referred to as, and I apologize, a hoe house. This is not good for us, and it's not good for the city. All of this is due to the previous owners who were crooks or didn't have the funds available to help maintain the building and mechanical components. Since we've lived here, the Residential Association has been constantly fighting to save the building and our homes. And I've had a front row seat to this, not only as an owner, but a member of the Edison Board of Directors. We have been desperate for hotel owners who would care about this building as much as us. We have been desperate for hotel owners who want to be neighbors and partners. Midas Hospitality is the perfect fit for our community. They have the funding, a great plan, and they want to invest in downtown St. Louis. If this tax abatement is not passed for Midas, they could walk away from this project. Then over 100 people will be living in a building that will continue to become unsafe and undesirable each day. If Midas does not go through with this purchase, my husband and I very seriously will discuss leaving the city of St. Louis. I would venture to say we're not the only ones that would have this discussion. Please put aside any hurdles and provide Midas with the tax abatement.
Thank you, Ms. Mead-Whiter. I'm sorry. The time.
Sorry. Thank you so much.
Mr. David Evans, if you'll state your full name, you'll have 3 minutes to proceed. Okay.
I've lived in the condominium, the Edison condominium since 2011. I've lived in the condominium since 2011. During that time period, we've gone through 2 bankruptcies, 2 foreclosures, and had 4 different sets of owners. The building has been on the market for 4 years, and we've had multiple purchasers walk away from the building because it's too hard. I've got a couple of facts for you that I think was cited earlier, but I do want to do one thing before we do it. I'd like all my neighbors who live at the Edison to please stand up. I venture to say that there is absolutely no one here who is opposed to this legislation. We all desperately want our building to be repaired. We've gone to court. We've fought the, as she said, possibly crooks in civil court and won a huge judgment against them, over $300,000. Plus, they used a tactic that might be familiar to people, and it's delay, delay, delay. We incurred $600,000 in legal fees, and they were forced to pay all of that money to us and then subsequently went bankrupt. We invested every penny we got into our building. We replaced the carpeting, we painted it. We try to keep our part of the building up to date. Since 2018, the city assessed our building at $22 million for all of the condos. That assessments have fallen to $17 million because of the deterioration and the poor sales that we've had to go through. So it's probably, I hope this is the first time somebody's come to you and said, we actually want to see our taxes go up because we want the values of our condominiums to rise with the completion of this project. And I'll happily pay the extra taxes that got reduced because the building crumbled under our feet. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. I want you all to know why I made it a point to clap when you all stood, because what I understand for sure is that nobody on this side or any other seats in the room other than you all seats feels the impact of this the most, right? And so making sure you know that even your presence has value in being here today for us to be able to work with your Edison community, right? And some of the things, sir, that you said, I can speak for myself. I've been here. This is my second term. I've never heard anybody stand on any dais and say they were willing to spend more in taxes to, to help our city. So thank you to all of you all for standing in the community. We know that there are some things that we have to work through, but we definitely appreciate you all taking the time out today to participate in this very important part of this process, which is the committee hearing. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Alderman Aldridge and then open it up for questions from my colleagues.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peggy, you made me a little emotional as you was talking, because I know how much this mean to you, and I know how much this mean to all the residents. And like the chairwoman of this committee, said, we don't live it. I just had an opportunity just to see a little bit of it, and to all the residents that came out today, thank you. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for speaking out. And thank you for showing up and organizing, and for the committee to hear just a little bit of the testimony. I know committee members also in the drive probably have about 20 emails from residents, as well as letters of support from Kelly, from the Executive Director of Downtown Community Improvement District, Dan Pister, the Chairman of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, as well as Ms. Kitty Ratcliffe, who's the President of Explore St. I will save my closing comments for closing, but I wanted to echo the comments of the chairwoman and thank each resident that showed up, and inform you of the other individuals who also support this project. And I will take questions from my committee members.
Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Alderman, for the presentation. My apologies for missing the first few minutes of it. So some of my questions might cover some topics that we discussed earlier. Just out of curiosity, this is not the first time that the building has been proposed for redevelopment or rehabilitation. The last time that it underwent rehab, and this might actually be for SLDC. Is Zach still here? Were there tax incentives provided to the project the last time that it was rehabbed? And if so, how much and when was that?
I can't tell you exactly amount. That's been over 15, 20 years ago. So there was some type of tax abatement or TIF for this building. Yes, correct.
There was.
There was.
But
2001.
I'm sorry, Doug. Can you? The people at home can't hear unless you're at the mic.
Sorry about that. I'm not aware of what the economic development package was back then, but our information says that it was redeveloped in 2001.
So in 2001, which was 22 years ago, it was redeveloped. There was incentives. So it must have just rolled off the incentive, because, 2001, I would imagine we were probably giving 15, 20 years of tax abatement if for everything downtown.
Could have been 10 years also. I can't speak on that.
I highly doubt that. Was it? It was for 10?
Yeah.
Was it a tax abatement only, or was it a TIF?
Tax abatement. Each condo would have each.
The residents of the condo only. Okay. Right. No. Okay. It's kind of humorous to me that you all know more about this than SLDC does, and sad at the same time. So not a reflection on the current staff that's here. There was one individual who managed these programs for a long time and is on a consulting basis with SLDC currently, and still doesn't seem to provide information readily. Who I shall not name, but I'm sure everyone is familiar with him. So if it was 10 years, so that would have been 2011, those tax abatements expired on the condominiums. Did the condos start depreciating? I know I'm supposed to be asking this of SLDC, but I'm curious, when did the condos start depreciating in value?
Appreciating?
Depreciating.
I would say in the last 5, 6 years. Yeah.
Okay. So it wouldn't have.
More than that, a lot more than that.
Okay. Okay. I'm trying to do math in my head, because tax abatements only freeze taxes a value before the redevelopment. And so if in the event that they started depreciating prior to the abatement expiring, then the abatement would have been virtually worthless to the owners of the condos. So I'm trying to get some math in my head done here, and it would be helpful to have those numbers. It's my understanding that we're not taking a vote on this today. Is that correct? Has that been determined at this point?
I'll keep that at the closing.
You'll,
I'll mention that at the closing.
Oh, I thought you just did close, Alderman. My apologies. So I don't know. I would like some time to further digest some of the information and the numbers here. I'll make it easy for you, Alderman. I would prefer waiting on this at the moment, just so I can get a more comprehensive picture of the history and what these fine people have had to endure in terms of the finances behind this project and the incentives made available to it previously. And I think certainly Midas, the proposal that's here in terms of the renovations, it is admirable in terms of the MBWE participation on the construction side of the project. And certainly you have the support, the large support of residents who are there, and it's unfortunate that they're in this situation. I couldn't imagine how that must feel to have your home in a building that's being neglected like that. Although if you have ever been to Dutchtown, we live with vacancy all over our community, and so it's a challenge for us as well to deal with kind of similar types of situations that are not of our own making. So certainly can appreciate where you're coming from. With respect to the project, so it does talk about WB&B participation, and I think you mentioned, Zach, prevailing wages and union participation on the construction side.
It can be, we can't say union, but we can force a prevailing wage. Yeah.
So, but that would be on, the prevailing wage would be on the construction side
Correct.
of the project. Is there any type of arrangement or agreements? I've gotten several emails from various union representatives the past few weeks about participation or engagement with representatives on the back end with the hotel operations.
We do not get in those type of details because we have not approached that. All our dealings are during construction period. So if that is something we want to address in the future, we can address that, but SLDC has not tied that into developments in the past.
Okay. So with
And if I could jump in, Alderman, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that, first I'm gonna start off by saying I think everybody on this board know I'm pro-union, from the Fight for 15 to actually working with SEIU. I'm a huge believer in unions and workers having the right to unionize if they choose to do so, and being able to get a living wage so that they can provide their family off of that. As you know, Alderman Cone, as I've talked with you several times, there has been conversations between the developer and union, and the union. At this point, there's been 3 conversations that I have not been part of, but been happy to organize those conversations because I think it's important for the developer, and if workers want to unionize, and a union that represent those workers, to have a conversation to say that they won't retaliate against those workers, that they will actually let those workers unionize. I don't think we are at a perfect level. I think we've definitely made progress, and I know the developers have, which you've received an email saying that they support and will not retaliate as far as against the labor laws. I think we're still trying to just make sure that in all good faith, if workers did want to unionize, that they wouldn't be punished. But those conversations, like you said, like Zach said, we cannot force, at this body being a right to work state, we cannot force people to unionize. However, I know the importance of it, and I know that those conversations need to happen. And that's why I've continued to work with Midas and work with unions and make sure those conversations are happening so that we can actually communicate and in good faith have conversations.
Okay. I thank you, Alderman, for that. I am also just curious, just given some of the feedback that was provided with respect to the abatements. So in 2001, when this was abated, it was abated for the condo owners for a period of 10 years. Now we're talking about an abatement of 10 years at 75%. How is that being distinguished between the hotel, the property owners, the building as a whole?
The hotel is a condo itself, so this abatement just applies for that condo.
So all of the floors that would be parking and hotel associated are its own
Correct.
individual condo unit within the building?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry if that was covered. I was a little bit, delayed, as I mentioned earlier. So, so this abatement would be specific for that unit
Just the
within the
hotel piece.
condo association?
Right.
Okay. So none of the other individual condo owners have the benefit of the
Correct.
abatement?
And to be honest, with this amount of investment in the building, it's most likely their taxes would go up in some way.
Is any of the investment that Midas is making in common or shared areas of the condo?
Thank you. So we're renovating the whole building, so there is a lot of public space and common areas that we're renovating that are part of that $45 million.
So, and I'm just trying to get a picture here for the public as well. So when I say common spaces, I'm referring to places like hallways, that are shared spaces on each floor that the condo association, shares. If there's a rooftop deck,
Yeah.
obviously
So
you already
we're-
mentioned the mural, which
Yeah,
is,
so all the amenities we're upgrading, so they have access to all those amenities, shared amenities. We are not upgrading the halls on their floors because that's their condo level, but we're actually adding stairwells to the building because it does not have enough fire exits now. If we would have a catastrophe, there would be not enough exits to get people out. So we're going to add 2 giant stairwells that will be coming through their space too.
okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Is
when it
there
was-
only one stairwell in the?
No, there's multiple stairwells, but the code has changed, right? So
Right.
so the code has changed over the last 20 years. The requirement now is different, so we're just going to add more stairwells.
Okay.
There are stairwells. I don't want to portray that they're not stairwells, but it doesn't meet code.
Okay.
All right.
And then from an elevator perspective, are the elevators
we're
operable? Or
So the freight elevators don't work today, and so we're going to fix all those, and then we'll fix the commercial elevators too.
okay, and are those accessible by residents?
The residents have access to the elevators, yes.
Okay. I know some condo associations actually require residents to use freight elevators if they're available for things like moving furniture, or in some cases, if they have dogs, they have to take them in the freight elevator versus the main elevator.
Yeah, to move in and move out, the freight elevators are used, but not for pets.
Okay.
The passenger elevators are used for that.
Is it a requirement of the condo association that the freight elevators are used for move in, move out, or? Yep.
The freight elevators are a common element. So through the master association, we share in some of that expense. So we use it, but we also share in some of the expense.
Will the condo association be contributing to the renovation in terms of any upgrades that are provided to the elevator then?
Yes.
Okay. And then is the condo association representative, and forgive me, so are each condo it's condoized per unit, not per floor? Or how is this?
You mean how is it
So each condo,
calculated?
yeah. Well, so is each floor its own association, or is the association for everyone?
No, the
as a-
association is for all 4 condo floors,
Okay.
the Edison condo floors.
Okay.
And so on the master association, we hold a seat on that for decisions being made and financial decisions and whatnot for our common areas. And then when an expense comes only for the common areas, nothing else, we do contribute to that.
Okay. And so for the purposes of the upcoming renovation, I presume this meets the but-for test. So if the incentives weren't available, the development would not occur?
Right. I mean, we've pushed back the closing now because we thought we would be farther ahead with this, but we're not. So we're supposed to close next Wednesday, and that's our last date. If we don't get the abatement, we can't move forward.
Okay. And then with respect to the shared areas, so the renovations are specifically for like the stairwells, the elevators, and the amenities in the hotel.
Hotel, and then the hotel public space, then event center,
Here.
right,
Okay.
exterior, garage.
And the garage. I've heard about the garage as well. Okay, I think that's all the questions that I have for now, Madam Chair. I'll give my colleagues the opportunity to also ask any questions that they might have, and if you don't mind coming back to me at the end, I might have a few more.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate it. Can you talk a little bit about the timeline for the construction and the project, and how long you think it'll take before there actually is a Sheraton up and running?
Yeah, it's going to take us a year. A year. Okay, our plan was to close next week on Wednesday, January the 1st. We would start decommissioning the hotel, get all the old furniture out, carpet out, start tearing that up, and then February-ish we'll start the renovation of the hotel, the guest rooms, as well as the apartments. There's a pool up on the 13th floor, which will be the 14th floor now going forward. But we're going to take that pool out because it leaks pretty awfully, and so we're going to take the pool out of the building and make some outdoor living space up there that will be available for the condo owners, the apartment users, and the hotel guests.
Okay, and I saw in the presentation that there are a few other hotels in the city of St. Louis, and then in one in the county, it looks like, that you all have done work on. Is that correct, or is that Steadfast City's work?
Yeah, I mean, Midas, we own and operate 45 hotels in 15 states. This is where we're from, but we have a dozen hotels in the metro area. In the city, we have the Element Hotel and the Aloft Hotel in Cortex.
So some of those at least received abatements, or all of them, or in the city?
So the Aloft Hotel, Cortex, did receive abatement. We did not benefit from that. That went to the district, okay? And then on the Element, we did apply for abatement and received 10 years of abatement on the Element Hotel next to the Foundry.
And how many years in are you on that?
We are in 3 year. We're in year 3.
Okay. I have a question for SLDC. I see on here on the scorecard that the project received 7 out of a possible 9 points for transit access. This is right across the street from the bus stop I take every day. Does it actually have to be on top of a bus stop to get that 9 points, or how could this be any closer to
Very
transit?
true. Give me 1 second. I'll let Andrew answer that one.
I know it already qualifies for the 30, it wouldn't move it out of the bracket or anything, but
Yeah, it's just that there's different point thresholds within some of our categories. So the 9 is actually future North-South Metrolink expansion. So it's the max of literally what's possible on this, most of the cities.
it still would be pretty close to that. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but it's not quite within our.
It's not. It's at a half-mile range or something.
Mhm.
So it's probably just outside of it if it's going down Jefferson.
Yeah, but great public transit access. So.
Yeah, fantastic public transit access. It's like I look at this building daily. Okay. Yeah, okay. How much do you expect I know we have here, the scorecard takes into account the increase in tax revenue with the abatement being provided with the new work that would happen. But as we've talked about, the expectation would be that the value of these condos would also be increasing. Do we have any sense of the increased property tax revenue, real estate tax revenue to the city with that? I know I'm kind of asking you to guess here.
We do not. We just looked at the condos that comprise the hotel portion. We didn't look at the privately held condos at all.
Okay. This seems like a very abnormal building for this sort of, no, okay. I think it looks like I'm right on that. So it's a little bit abnormal in terms of having this abatement affect just a hotel and there's condos. I can imagine kind of interesting. Can you speak a little bit more to that, and if I've just missed it and this is typical?
No, I mean, it's a unique building for sure. I think generally we try to be conservative with all these estimates. So if there are knock-on effects for the privately held condos, that's kind of a bonus. We didn't try to quantify it directly in this analysis. This just focuses on the hotel portion.
Okay. In terms of the numbers of abated hotels downtown, I think that's something that folks will bring up when they're concerned about tax abatements. What have been the successes of doing this sort of work with abatements on hotels? What have been the downsides? Is it heavily weighted in one direction or the other?
We've seen some owners go bankrupt recently, but this hotels still remain open. The Indigo is an example of one of them. I think the hotel market needs more brand names, variety. That's what our hotel studies stated back in 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But the issue is with the commercial market, office space, there's not much other investment happening in downtown besides the hotel market. So what we're seeing is an increase in applications for hotels because there's a kind of an opening there because the office space is suffering so much right now. So
Okay.
it's one of the few things that the banking institutions are lending currently right now.
Do we have any concerns about there being a bubble of some sort here? I mean, how many units does downtown need in terms of hotel space?
True. The Millennial Hotel, there's a couple others. The old hotel on 4th Street that closed recently, those two massive hotels. So it's going to take us a while to make up those numbers. So.
Okay. And if you don't mind coming back up. I want to call you Mr. Midas, but I know that's not your last name.
So the pandemic hurt the hotel industry, right? Especially in the urban environment where there was just not a lot of travel. And so those hotels were really not leveraged correctly, I think is probably the best way to put it. And so the difference there is that we're very well capitalized. We actually have a better location, okay, than some of those that went under trouble. And we're going to have a better brand. So I think there's a lot of pluses that are on our side that weren't on the other guys. So, but there still is plenty of demand for hotels in the city of St. Louis, and the city is underrepresented by quality hotels. All right, it needs more quality hotels, less mediocre.
Thank you. So, as Alderman Cohn mentioned, we did get several dozen letters from labor about this project and concerns about the project. It really didn't mention in the letters necessarily it was more about apprenticeships and then neutrality agreements. So can you speak to your other hotels and what sort of labor relationships you've had and anything that you would respond back to those concerns that folks have?
Sure. So we're not anti-union. Let me just say that right up front. We like I said, Midas owns multiple businesses in St. Louis. We own a construction company that uses union labor trades for everything. We own a carpentry company that is 100% union carpenters. And we support the unions on those trades. In St. Louis, though, and that's kind of normal in St. Louis, the trades are very dominant in the unions. In St. Louis, most of the hotel employees are not union. It's a very small percentage that are union. And so we've always been very successful with our employees, taking care of them, appreciating them, giving them more than fair salaries, great benefits. And so we've never had a union issue, right? We've never had anyone asked to unionize our hotels. It's never come up because we've always taken care of our associates. And so our belief is that, the norm here is most of the hotel employees are non. And so we're just trying to be what we've always been.
But you are planning on using union for construction. And what is your relationship with building trades and the coalition of unions in that?
So we have a signed agreement with the carpenters. So all the work here will we'll probably spend $30 million in union trades and renovating this thing, all right? I mean, that's what, we'll use union to do that. So that will not be an issue. We support the unions for our trades completely. The issue came up with that we, requested to have an agreement on the hotel employees side. And that's just not something that we've ever had, nor is it really common in St. Louis.
Can you speak about your relationship with building trades and just go a little bit deeper into that?
So we own a construction company here in town, Midas Construction. We not only build for ourselves, but we build for others. So we use union plumbing, union electricians, union carpenters, union labor, union flooring on our trades here in St. Louis. We just are building in St. Louis, and that's who we use. So we're a general contractor, so they're not my employees. We use other contractors. We have subcontractors.
Okay, thank you for answering. Alderman Aldridge, I didn't see any like clawback provisions in this. Is that something you can speak to in terms of if any terms aren't met? I don't know.
Maybe SLDC could speak more to that. There is not. I'm not sure if we've done that in the past on other ones. Maybe they could speak to if we've. It's definitely not in this, but if.
Yeah, I didn't see. I just wanted to know.
Yeah, or if this has historically been done for us clawbacks.
Yeah, well, we have clawbacks in our redevelopment agreements. If they do not hit their minority compliance or prevailing wage, we claw back the incentive, or they do not receive the incentive.
It doesn't have to be in the bill, though.
No, it goes in our redevelopment agreement.
Okay. I think that's it for now, and I really appreciate everyone's time.
Alderman Brownie.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. My colleagues have pretty well covered a lot of the questions I had, but first let me say thank you to all the owners of the condos that have come out today. I understand the effect that a dilapidated building can have if it's across the street. I can't imagine what it's like to have it inside the same building as you. So know that we hear you and that we understand what you're going through, and your interest in making sure that you can take care of the other part of your building that really affects your daily life. Just a couple questions. I understand that the Sheraton will be coming in after the renovation and running the hotel from there. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay. And if I'm remembering back, this used to be a Sheraton, right? So somewhere in between there, it changed ownership. It was the owner after Sheraton that let it go downhill.
Yes, the owner after the Sheraton. Am I correct, my condo friend owners? Okay. But yeah, so it wasn't just the after the Sheraton. There was also another owner that came into the building. I think this was the most recent owner that really had sucked the building dry. To the point where I talk about the fifth floor, they moved all of, as I want to say, the nice furniture from the fifth floor to other floors, and has left the fifth floor completely empty. And they've walked away from the building at this point. But there's been several owners that have come in that hasn't done as good as what the Sheraton was. I think folks was happy when the Sheraton was there, but after they left, it went downhill from there.
And do we know why the Sheraton walked away in the first place?
It's the quality of the building. I mean, as the product deteriorated, the brand went away, and so it just kept moving down the food chain of brands, right? It became a Red Lion, and then it became but there was something else in between, though. It was generic, St. Louis City Center Hotel, and then it became the Oyo, which is, it just kept moving down the food chain.
So you can see where my concern is leading here. I don't want to invest in this building again with city funds, which is essentially what tax abatement is doing, and then see Sheraton use it when it's fresh and new, and then hand it off again and watch this go through another 20-year cycle. What guarantees do we have? What commitment is Sheraton making to make sure that we are going to keep up maintenance on this and make sure that we don't fall back into the same cycle?
So Midas is actually the owner. Sheraton is not the owner. We buy a franchise, right? So Sheraton has given us a 30-year license, so you can expect it to be a Sheraton for the next 30 years. Marriott, which is the parent brand of Sheraton, has a 7-year refresh that needs to happen. So every 7 years, 14 years, 21 years, there's an automatic refresh that has to happen. We as the owners will do that. We do that on all our hotels. What happened previously is those improvements were not made, and so the hotel became in default with the brand, and eventually it went away.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And the last question I have is for you, actually. So I'm glad you're up here. So the two things that we've been contacted about by the unions, I think you've addressed that pretty well. You mentioned that hotel workers don't generally belong to a union. What they're asking for and what they've been asking us to ensure is mainly a union neutrality. So if the hotel workers were to try to form a union, can you agree to remain neutral on that and let that follow its course however it go out?
Yeah, I mean, we've sent a letter to the union already stating that, basically stating that. It was more than that, but we basically said we will follow all the laws and regulations. We're not trying to get in the way of our employees if they choose to unionize. That's not what we're trying to do. The way it was, we're just not, I'm not trying to make it so that, yeah, we're going to do the right thing, okay? We're going to be fair. We're going to follow all the rules. We just want to make sure everybody does the same, so.
Okay, thank you for that. I have no more questions.
Hey, Vice Chair Sanya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too want to first start off by just acknowledging all of the residents that have come out. I've never seen folks from a development project who are residents show up. I've seen an abundance of kind of like lobbyists and other folks, but it's so nice to see folks who actually live in a building coming out and just, you know, make sure I second what Alderman Clark Hubbard says, that you all's presence is really important and really powerful. I know the folks at home can't see it, but I think the setup of this room is actually really powerful, that we have folks from unions who are here and who are advocating for workers, and we have folks from residents and community. And this is a great example of, you know, the interest that Alderman Aldridge has had to balance while having these conversations and walking this line. And I think, period, as a city, you know, it's not always an easy task to figure out how do we do things that are new and haven't been done before while not hurting, you know, people and things that are already in place. And I know that Alderman Aldridge has been, and SODC and the unions and you all from the corporation are currently, you know, have had a lot of conversations. And so I just want to make sure that I acknowledge all of you all for engaging in the process and for showing up, because this is how we're going to get to legislation and public subsidies that actually benefits all of the public. My questions, I know that you kind of echoing kind of what Alderwoman Schweitzer mentioned. You talked a little bit about, and I think obviously the concern here is what I've seen from all the communication from unions is a concern for workers. And I know you said that hotels are usually not unionized. I think that we should change the way we do a lot of things in politics and in policy and not do what we usually do. But I also think that, you know, history is the best indicator of the future. So could you just speak a little bit more specifically about your other hospitality workers and maybe the types of benefits that they have, their pay, and just your treatment of them in that way to kind of give us some assurance and some knowledge of how that's currently working, because I think that's a great indicator of how it will go in the future.
Sure. No, I don't want to put down there is a local hotel union, and there is a need for that, because not all operators are good owners, right? I mean, they don't treat employees right, and so there is a need for that. I'm just saying that as a rule, our employees today are making above what the union scale is at the Marriott Grand, right? And they have benefits that are equal to or better than what the union offers today. They have a 401k. They have a lot of nice benefits. Our company's 18 years old here in St. Louis. I've got 15 to 17-year employees. We have a good mix of employees, a variety of families, and these 1,200 employees are my family. They're important to me, and I take that responsibility very, very seriously. So we're a good employer. We take care of our people. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to be good. We're going to be good for the city.
And just to be clear, you all are still in conversation. So you're not necessarily against them unionizing, but you're still engaging in conversations about.
So we had yet another meeting last night. Okay, and so there's nothing else scheduled. Just to be honest, but we had a meeting last night. I was, on the I'm just being honest here, okay? I was asked to sign something on the spot, and I chose not to do that, okay? And I'm really, in my world, the merits of this project stand on their own, you know, and it shouldn't matter what that is. We're going to treat people right, and if we don't, they'll have their opportunity to unionize.
Thank you. And then the other thing that I wanted to lift up that I know will apply for this process is Alderman Cone passed some legislation, and it has some things in it around some of the emails and communications and concerns that I received about what, you know, just kind of like the path forward, and specifically like the clawback revision that was asked about earlier. So I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that ordinance 71620 has some specific provisions in here about what it would look like if there's a failure to comply with the requirements of this ordinance or to comply with whatever community benefit commitments are agreed to, and also that there is a review following project completion for the duration of the incentive period, and the failure to maintain the property up to code would occur within 30 days. So I just wanted to make sure I put that on record for folks at home, for everyone who's watching, to kind of maybe go pull up that ordinance to kind of get a look at what our legislative process has kind of baked into it already for some of these checks and balances. Thank you.
We agree. Mm-hmm.
All right, Alderman Cone, you wanted me to circle back to you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really don't have any further comments or questions at this point in time. I appreciate everyone's time this morning and the perspective, and I'm processing a lot of the information that's been shared this morning, and look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you.
Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One letter I forgot, Greater St. Louis Inc. also provided a letter of support. I'll make sure I get that to the clerk so it can be in the drive. First and foremost, I want to again thank the residents. Only interest you guys have in this is living in a quality space that you have continued to live, and to try to make sure that the hotel is doing well. So as someone said, you guys can pay more taxes. But as I was there yesterday, from the Christmas decorations and how you all decorated the floor, I know that it's a community in that building, and usually in downtown buildings, you don't have that. I stayed in one and stayed in one before, and sometimes our downtown buildings are very transient. They just go in, they go out, and maybe they move in there. A lot of you all have been here 10, 15, and even longer, and want to stay there and want to be a partner with somebody who's going to help bring this hotel up, which isn't going to be an upgrade to your condos besides you paying more money, but it is an abatement. I'm happy Alderman Cone brought that up. It's not an abatement for the condos. It is an abatement for the hotel. Yes, there may be shared space as you guys walk through the hallways together, or come through the front entrance, or use some of the restaurants with people that stay in that hotel and try to become friends with them, and maybe they become extended stay and they stay there for a while and you build a relationship. But I appreciate you all letting me in your doors yesterday. Let me see several of your homes, seeing the condition of the hotel, and thank you for being here. Also, I want to thank the union for being here. I know that y'all fight is righteous, and it is a fight for the workers, and it is a fight to ensure, not necessarily, as I spoke with the representative from the union, is definitely not against the residents having a better building. She has said that several times. She wants to see the upgrade of the hotel, and she also wants to ensure that workers are going to be treated fairly. Not saying that they're not, but it's always good safeguards to have in there. As a former worker that had to organize, I know the importance of having those protections on the front end. To Midas, to Doug, and to Sam. Okay, I got it right. And the whole team, thank you for wanting to invest in St. Louis. Thank you for wanting to invest in downtown. Downtown is on the way up. I don't care what nobody say. The articles, the Post-Dispatch, they love to talk about the shootings that happen on Wash Ave over and over and over again. But there's a lot of positive things that are happening. And this investment, like I've told you, like I've told the union, I'm committed to wanting this to get done. Honestly, I'm more committed now after meeting the residents, I'm more committed to the residents because I know how important this project is to the quality of life that they got. If this project fails, or you walk away or the union walk away, the people that live in the building are the ones who are still going to be affected by it. So to all parties, this is the way that sometimes legislation work out. We are getting a lot closer than where we was when this conversation started. I will not, as Alderman Konax, I won't be holding a vote on it today, just to let people know as far as the process. Just because there's not a vote does not mean the bill is dead. I'm committed to ensuring that this gets done. Like I told Ms. Peggy, as we talked about the process a little bit, is getting this bill done and getting it across the finish line, because I do know how important it is to the residents. You guys have my commitment that I'm hopeful that we will get this done. And with that, Madam Clerk and members of the committee, I appreciate you all actually being able to hear a little bit more than, and I'm not saying this in a negative way. I know we've all received letters from the union. I think it was also important to hear from people who actually live in the condos. It's good to see all sides and perspectives. So to the committee members, I thank you all for asking those hard questions, because we're talking about a subsidy as well. And that's important when it comes to the future of our city. And with that, I will hold this vote for today and look for a future meeting on this in the future.
Thank you so much, Alderman Aldridge. And again, thank you everyone for being here, participating in this very important part of this process. And also understanding that, along with my colleagues, how much work goes into this before you all even get to us, right? And out of respect for that, I'll be looking forward to taking a vote as soon as possible. All right, we'll move to item number 2, and out of respect for my colleague, Alderman Cohen, already got the okay that you can present your bill from your seat instead of going up to the dais.
Thank you, Madam Chair, but I will still go to the dais. I can manage as much. Thank you, though. Appreciate
I want
it.
to give you the option. Thank you.
Mr. Pfeffer from CDA just handed out some materials. I think everyone has them, Madam Clerk. If you could make sure that they're posted to the share drive, that would be great. Board Bill 152 is the acceptance of a grant of $2.5 million would be directed towards the airport. And we have CDA here actually, and I'm going to turn it over to Noel so that he can explain some more of the particulars here and ask or answer any questions from the committee about the grant specifics. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Cohen, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. This can be seen as a companion bill to Board Bill 88, also sponsored by Alderman Cohen, which recently passed, authorizing a ground lease of 175 acres of airport property to Boeing. The Brownlee site is highlighted on the sheet before you, and that is a 100-acre site. And the plan is for Boeing, which is currently competing for a large federal defense contract, to build a $1.8 billion facility on this site. It will include over 500 jobs, and the ground lease between airport and Boeing, which has already been executed, is for $3 million a year fair market value for the property. Boeing's campus is immediately north of the Brownlee site, and they are already beginning site preparation work. That's why Earlier this year, the city, along with Boeing, as well as Greater St. Louis, SLDC, CDA, and the airport, applied for this state industrial site development grant for $2.5 million to prepare this site in anticipation of this $1.8 billion project. The tender decision is expected around mid-2024, and Boeing is planning to have the first building complete by early 2026. They are highly confident that they will win this tender, but the plan is to move forward with this $2.5 million to prepare the site, even if it's not, as it still helps beautify our airport's property and prepare it for productive redevelopment. Again, the benefits of the project overall include $1.8 billion in development, 500 plus jobs, beautification of airport property, and a $3 million revenue stream a year. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
And I'll add, this site, for those of you that aren't familiar, is part of the airport expansion plans, and then also part of what was noise mitigation relief. So these were parcels at one point in time that had homes on them. They've since been demolished, but there's a lot of dumping and other things that happen over there. So this would be basically cleaning and remediating a lot of the kind of residual leftover issues there.
All right, we'll start with questions. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you very much. So lots of collaboration here. Can you talk a little bit more about that between the various cities and collaboration that occurred to make this possible?
I mean, I can speak at a high level. There's always collaboration between various municipalities out in St. Louis County whenever you're dealing with anything out at Lambert, St. Louis International Airport. The airport director does a wonderful job at maintaining relationships with the municipalities out in the county. And she really feels a lot of their struggles. Frankly, there's phone calls on a very regular basis from some of the municipalities out there, whether that's Bridgeton, Blackjack, Kenlock, you name it. She's on the phone with them fairly regularly, dealing with it. So I would imagine she's taken the same approach to coordination with these municipalities with respect to this particular project, but I'll turn it over to Noel for any specifics.
I can't speak on the collaboration with the municipalities. However, I can share that the application for the industrial site development grant, while it was formally submitted by CDA because we felt we would be more competitive with the city as the applicant, it was drafted in deep collaboration with SLDC and Greater St. Louis. And there was a group of CDA, SLDC, and Greater St. Louis staff that worked collaboratively on the application itself. And the city of Berkeley.
So is this property owned by the city?
The property is owned by the airport.
The airport, okay, great, okay. Thank you so much. That's it.
Alderman Brownie.
Thank you. I have no questions.
Vice Chair Sanye.
Just commending to Alderman Cone and to Director Pfeiffer for your work on this. No questions at this time.
All right, Alderman Cone.
With that, I would ask for your favorable consideration on Board Bill number 2.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 152 with the due pass recommendation.
Second.
Madam Clerk, you can call the roll.
Alderman Cone.
Aye.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Alderman Browning.
Aye.
Chair Clark Hubbard. We have 5 aye votes.
All right, congratulations with that. You passed Board Bill 152. We'll move on to Board Bill 162. Vice Chair Sanye.
So thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is for a project that is in Benton Park West that is located in the 7th Ward. I know you all have a presentation in front of you, and so I can let Zach maybe just give a quick summary if you don't want to walk through the entire thing.
Thank you. This one should be a lot fewer questions, hopefully. This is a very good project. It's vacant lots LRA currently owns at the corner of Arsenal and Jefferson. We've had several developers look at this site over the years. This will be 49 senior citizen units. Rents range from $600 to $702. 36 one bedrooms, 13 multiple two bedrooms, I believe. So DeSales is the developer, scores 85 on the community scorecard, it's very high. So with all LIHTC projects, it's 10 years at 90, followed by 5 years at 50.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think we all know we're having a lot of conversations about the difficulty in our city of finding affordable housing. And so especially thinking about our senior residents that are on a fixed income, even as inflation applies, it doesn't usually apply to the income that they received. And then also I just can't compliment, SLDC, LRA enough. We've really just been focusing on vacancy areas within the 7th Ward. And this is going to address 6 of those locations that have been sitting vacant for a long time. And the only other thing that I would add as well is DeSales is also going to have some rental assistance available for the senior citizens as a part of their own work and their own funding mechanism. So if seniors are there and start to have a hard time, because I know we're looking at $702, but if you're only getting $1,000 a month for your Social Security, and then you have to spend $600 or $702 of that doesn't leave you with much there. So it's really been some detailed work on behalf of DeSales and all the partners at the table to build affordable, sustainable housing, think about a population that's often short of it, include multiple bedroom units, because we know that that's especially a shortage, and then even further supports of making sure that once we get folks in, we do everything we can to make it so that they can stay as long as they would like. Thank you, and I can take questions from the committee.
Alderman Cone.
Thank you. So this is not the first time that we've had a development proposal at this intersection. I'm curious what funding is currently in place for the project. Is this something that we're actually going to see realized at this point in time? I think this is probably the 3rd time the site's been up before this body for incentives. So I'm just...
I know there's been other projects that went in front of the Plan Commission, but this will be the first board build for this area. Well, second, actually.
I'm pretty sure Dan
Yes.
Gunther had
Yes.
a board bill before us.
It did not pass out of the body. It sat because they did not receive LIHTC. But they applied for LIHTC again this year. We're hopefully they'll get it this year. We're hoping to pass this out to lay the groundwork for future development if they don't receive LIHTC.
So is this the same developer that was
From-
working with Alderman Gunther previously, or is this
Correct.
a new entity?
This DeSales.
Oh, it is DeSales
It's
still.
DeSales
Okay,
still.
wonderful. They do amazing work, and very commendable to provide affordable, low-income housing in our communities. I don't have any further questions, and thank you, Alderwoman, for sponsoring the bill.
No problem. And then just also to answer the question about, there is some ARPA funding that's been in place, and also $850,000 in home fund through SLDC as well that is in pocket to go. And so hopefully we get this full package, and that's enough to make this project happen and be as possible.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. I'm excited about the project.
Alderman Browning.
Similarly, I am excited about the project. Don't have any questions. Agree with Alderman Cone that DeSales does excellent work, and look forward to hopefully making this happen.
Thank you. I'm definitely going to echo the admiration for DeSales and the work they do. So thank you for bringing this up, and SLDC, the work you've done to continue to fill this gap we have in affordable housing for seniors here in the city of St. Louis. With that, I'll allow you to close.
Okay, I think we've said it all. You all have given my points. I think this is exciting. I think it's a great model too for other future projects. Just even looking at between the ARPA funds, the home funds, the LIHTC funds, these subsidies, really getting an in-depth look at how much money it takes to do these projects, make them quality and make them affordable. It's like no joke. And then also even thinking further, really grateful to DeSales because they were such great partners about that rental assistance fund and thinking about sustaining folks what's there. And so with that, I will ask for a do pass recommendation.
I move that we pass Board Bill 162 out with a do pass recommendation.
Second.
Previous roll.
No objections to previous roll. Congratulations. Board Bill 162. All right, next up on the agenda is something I'm very excited about. It is our city housing report from CDA and RISE. I'm going to mention that this report didn't just start, right? That this came about 3 or 4 years ago. I had the honor of speaking with Alderman Rhodey this morning about where this conversation started, right? And I see one of our other former Alderwomen, Dr. Davis here. This conversation started with them, you all, and I think it's always important that we make sure our new colleagues know where these conversations began. I didn't know if you wanted to move a chair up so that they can be seated per her request. I know he said this started about 3 or 4 years ago, and this was the conversation that was started around incentive reform. They had hired the mastermind, Jonathan Ferry, and they were trying to get a better grasp on how CDA, LIHTC, and youth tax funds could work and merge together, best uses for them, and understanding the trade-offs, and also creating this central loading, central docking space for this data. So I reached out to April Ford Griffin as well and got some understanding on this, and I'm really looking forward to this report today. So with that, I'll let you all begin. He can move that chair up to here if he wants to. Okay. Okay.
There we go. Thank you, everyone. We're getting our presentation up here, and I'm just going to provide a high-level overview of some of CDA's takeaways from this report before you get the deep dive from RISE staff. And I want to begin by thanking RISE, Lockmuller Group, Black Art, and the dozens of city employees and community members who contributed their time and expertise to this report. As Alderwoman Clark Hubbard spoke to, this report originated prior to the pandemic with a request from the HUD's committee, so it's a pleasure to be able to bring it back to you all. It was delayed due to COVID-19, and it represents a snapshot in a particular place and time. A lot of the data you're going to see is from 2015 to 2019, which means in many cases the reality may be even worse now or different. But it's a wonderful foundation for a conversation that it should be an ongoing conversation about affordable housing in the city of St. Louis. And one of the things that I'll close with is by inviting you all, and the Board of Aldermen in particular, and the public more broadly, into an ongoing dialogue as part of CDA's 5-year consolidated planning process. At that point, I just want to quickly give an overview of CDA's role in housing in the city of St. Louis and why this report, why the request came to CDA to issue an RFP for this and to work with RISE to develop it. CDA's housing production team currently manages over 75 awards supporting the development of over 2,000 affordable units. We also manage the city's home repair program, which has served 317 actually homeowners in 2023 to date. We also work very closely with our corresponding state agency, MHDC, to identify the city's LIHTC priorities. And actually, we have to sign off on all LIHTC projects as consistent with the city's consolidated plan in order for them to receive LIHTC awards. And that last piece, the creation of the 5-year consolidated plan, is especially essential because we're due for our next one. It's due November 15th, 2024. It's our 2025 to 2029 consolidated plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing through that process and the opportunities it presents. But it's an important opportunity to engage and continue this dialogue over the coming year. I spoke a little bit, as did Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, about the origins and scope of this effort. I want to really emphasize that it builds on a growing tapestry of research into affordable housing in the city of St. Louis, starting with the really foundational segregation in St. Louis, dismantling the divide report that really demonstrates how generations of racial segregation, restrictive covenants, redlining, and discriminatory appraisal practices turned our real estate market into an engine of oppression and has left scars like the Delmar Divide, collapsed homes, and vacant lots etched into the fabric of St. Louis. And that's really the starting point for this administration's work on housing as well, is that housing is a human right. That's part of our Economic Justice Action Plan, is housing justice and expanding access to quality, safe, affordable housing for all. And that has resulted in a historic investment in affordable housing. The number one takeaway that we've had from this report is the degree of cost burden in the city of St. Louis. The report found that nearly half of city tenant households are cost burden. And when we say cost burden, the way that's defined is spending more than 30% of their income on rent and utilities. And again, nearly half of tenants are severely cost burdened, and collectively they pay over $170 million more than they can afford in rent every year. That's $170 million of wealth transferred from tenants to landlords each year that they cannot afford for childcare, food, what have you. So it really dramatizes and emphasizes the need for investments into affordable housing. What we also see, though, here is how concentrated this burden is on individuals earning under 50% AMI. We can see that those who earn less than 50% AMI actually bear $150 million of that $170 million burden. And this community of approximately 30,000 cost-burdened individuals is also who we see cycling in and out of housing instability. Another finding that the report had was that there are about 30,000 individuals on the wait list for housing authority vouchers. This is that community. We also know from our work with Ptolemy that the city sees between 10 and 15,000 evictions a year. Before the pandemic, that number was about 16,000. In 21 and 22, we saw it go down to about 10,000. Now we're trending back up to about 13 or 14,000 evictions a year. And this is that community, those folks under 50% AMI who are housing insecure, who cannot afford their rent, who are getting evicted, and then ultimately cycling in and out of homelessness. Another sobering statistic that we've been shared and that informs all this work comes from the public schools. That shares that 20% of public school students, about 4,000 students, are unhoused and housing unstable. And so I think that's the first huge takeaway here, is just the degree of cost burden and how that translates into severe housing instability in the city of St. Louis. The second big takeaway that we have here at CDA from this report is it serves as a benchmark. It tells us what did the city do in terms of housing production, in terms of home repair between 2015 and 2019, and how are we stacking up now? And that's what I'm pleased to share with you here. As you can see, according to this data, between 2015 and 2019, the city of St. Louis subsidized 1,261 affordable units. Of those, 39 were under 30% AMI, and about 65 were for-sale homes. So how are we comparing? And the study, I should note, also found why this is so critically needed, finding that without any form of subsidy, you would need a rent of at least $1,500 for development to be financially viable, and that is unaccessible to 89% of St. Louis renters. And the RISE team will get more into that shortly. But how are we stacking up? The answer is pretty well right now thanks to this unprecedented influx of federal funds. Currently, the city of St. Louis has over 2,500 units in the development pipeline, so over double what we produced between 2015 and 2019. And you can see how that breaks out here between the different affordability levels. So we actually have 626 units in the development pipeline compared to 39 between 2015 and 2019 that are affordable under 30% AMI. So we've dramatically we've dramatically expanded and diversified the pipeline from 1,261 between 2015 and 2019 to 2,685 currently, so over doubling the pipeline overall, but also diversifying it. Whereas between 2015 and 2019, we produced 39 units under 30% AMI, we're currently supporting the development of 626 units under 30% AMI. We're also expanding our investment in for-sale housing. Whereas between 2015 and 2019, we invested in 65 for-sale units, we're currently supporting the development of over 200 for-sale units. So you can see that we're diversifying it at both ends of the spectrum, as well as expanding the pipeline overall. You can see a similar trend with City of St. Louis home repair. The study provided us with a benchmark that between 2015 and 2019, we provided about 700 home repairs and spent about $14 million. So that's an average of 141 home repairs a year, spending $2.8 million. $2.8 million a year. Currently, as you can see in the table below, whereas last year was very much in line with that historical precedent, serving about 155 homeowners and spending about $2 million. This past year, we have served 317 homeowners and spent $4.3 million. So again, nearly doubling those historical figures. And so that's the second big takeaway that we have from this report is it serves as a benchmark and allows us to measure our performance against it. A third key takeaway for us is the 5 principles that the report emphasized to guide affordable housing development. And that's that it should be focused, asset-based, inclusive, resilient, and community-driven. And we've worked to implement each of these principles in our recent funding cycles. And in particular through our Neighborhood Transformation Grant funding cycle, which included funding for HUD housing production, as well as ARPA-funded housing, proactive development of community assets, neighborhood beautification, and others. And these NOFAs all included bonus points based on the Economic Justice Index, which was designed to focus our investment into the highest need communities and geographies. It was also provided bonus points to projects that were near major transit routes, grocery stores, schools, parks, and other community assets for asset-based development. We also provided bonus points to inclusive housing that followed universal design standards and fair housing practices. We also provided bonus points to projects with higher quality, more sustainable construction that complied with Energy Star and building energy performance standards and which used higher quality materials. And then finally, we provided bonus points to projects that were consistent with neighborhood plans and are working to expand the city's investment with PDA and SLDC into neighborhood planning more broadly. And you can see as a result that there's a pretty clear clustering of the city's investments into housing. And that's intentional and a result of our inclusive, resilient, community-driven, focused, and asset-based strategy consistent with the RISE Housing Report. And we also have a map up there for anyone that's interested, an in-person map that shares that shows these at a larger scale. So what's next? First of all, we do have another Neighborhood Transformation Grant funding cycle coming up in February 2024. This will be primarily HUD funded, but will also include reprogrammed ARPA funds and will include $9 million of home ARP dollars for permanent supportive housing. So that's really focused on that under 30% AMI for individuals who are unhoused, at risk of becoming unhoused, victims of domestic violence, and struggling with mental health challenges. We are also making $5 million available for our traditional housing production NOFA, but again, implementing a recommendation from the report, are prioritizing preservation as well as production of affordable housing by making vacant unit turns an eligible use. Because we think that that's one of the highest impact ways that we can create affordable housing is by activating vacant units, which only can require between $5,000 and $15,000 of investment to bring online versus other new construction or fully vacant buildings, which can require hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit. And so the bang for your buck is much higher. And we know from MHDC data that about 15% of the city's LIHTC stock is currently vacant. We have a great spreadsheet from MHDC of the LIHTC portfolio that shows that about 1,500 units of about 11,000 units total are currently vacant. And so we can prioritize bringing those online much more efficiently than we could build 1,500 units. And so that's one way that we can respond to this immense. Two other items that are coming up are our pro-housing application. That was submitted to HUD, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in the next slide, as well as our 5-year consolidated planning process, which I alluded to earlier. Speaking briefly about our pro-housing proposal, and I want to thank Dylan and Miriam, who are here from SLDC in the planning department and who did an immense amount of work on this application. We applied for a total of $10 million, and I think this really shows some of the ways that we are thinking strategically about the highest impact investments that we can make into affordable housing, and that includes investments into vacant unit turns, as I discussed previously, into site preparation, into historic, I'm going to talk about affordability policies on the next slide, into historic and sustainable energy efficient housing, as well as investing in updating our zoning code, which we know presents unique barriers to the development of affordable housing, as well as, and I think this is really exciting, developing an affordable housing design book of pre-approved designs. This is something that other communities have invested in and can dramatically accelerate development timelines and reduce costs by having a book, a library of designs that we know comply with our zoning code, with our building code, with our historic requirements, et cetera. And then finally, making investments to improve coordination and ongoing action planning between the various city departments that touch housing, because it's not just CDA, it's also SLDC, the planning department, the Department of Human Services, CREA, the assessor's office, the building division, collector of revenue, and others that touch affordable housing. And then finally, I really do want to emphasize the 2025 to 2029 consolidated plan. We are currently, first of all, it is required pursuant to 24 CFR Part 91, so we don't have a choice as to whether or not we do it, but it's also an opportunity because it requires robust public participation, a market value analysis, which we are working to refresh, a housing needs assessment, an analysis of impediments of fair housing, and a strategic plan. And that strategic plan is required to include our housing production goals. We're required to tell HUD, this is how many units we plan to produce in the next 5 years. And that's a tremendously helpful and powerful exercise for the city of St. Louis to undertake. So in order to produce this consolidated plan, we are contracting with LISC and the Reinvestment Fund, and we'll be launching our consolidated planning process in early 24 as soon as those contracts are executed. Another opportunity that it presents, and which I just kind of alluded to, is a qualified allocation plan. This was actually another recommendation of the RISE Housing Report that we produce, even though we're not required to. The entities that are required to produce the qualified allocation plan is MHDC, the state, as part of administering the LIHTC program. But essentially, the RISE report recommended developing something similar at the local level that includes detailed housing production preservation goals. But in our case, we really also want to prioritize updating our affordability policies, and in particular, linking those to the market value analysis. And let me provide an example about why this is so important. Our current affordability policy for for-sale homes is one size fits all. The way it works is that any for-sale home that CDA invests in, we forgive the construction loan upon sale to the low to moderate income buyer, and then the requirement on the buyer is that they must pay back the down payment assistance, typically $5,000 or $10,000, over the if they ever sell the property at market rate. And the problem that this creates is that actually the policy works great in low growth neighborhoods, but the problem that it creates in high growth neighborhoods is that there's a strong incentive on that buyer to resell the property at market rate. Because if they bought the property at $150,000, but at the market, they can sell it for $250,000, paying back the $5,000 down payment assistance isn't going to prevent them from reselling it. They will happily resell the property and pay back the down payment assistance. And we see this, in fact, happening in neighborhoods like Benton Park West. And the problem that that creates, even though it's excellent from a wealth building perspective, it is not excellent from a long-term affordability mixed income neighborhoods perspective, because it means that our affordable housing program has turned into a lottery program. And so while that's not inherently good or bad, there's countervailing kind of policy goals in terms of wealth building and expanding access to opportunity and ensuring long-term affordability in mixed income neighborhoods. We want to balance that in a more nuanced and sophisticated manner by having different affordability policies depending on the market value analysis area. And so that's a conversation that we will have through our consolidated planning process, and we'll explore various alternatives so that we have a spectrum of affordability policies that we can apply in different contexts. One easy solution is to expand the recapture basis. That's something that other cities do in this exact context. But that doesn't necessarily solve the problem in certain cases, and that's why another alternative can be a land use restriction agreement requiring that the property be resold to a low to moderate income homeowner. So instead of recapturing funds, you just create the requirement. And then conversely, there are other innovative models, including ground lease, rent to own, and other equity share models. So I raise this because I think this is an important piece of the conversation that we'll have over the coming year about different affordable housing investment models and ways that we can ensure that the investments that we make today are preserving long-term housing affordability in the city of St. Louis and not simply kind of disappearing into the ether. Finally, another opportunity is updating our LIHTC project requirements. As I mentioned before, CDA does currently sign off on every LIHTC application to say that this is consistent with our consolidated plan, but our consolidated plan doesn't really say what we expect from LIHTC projects in the city of St. Louis. So whether that's fair housing, tenant protections, or something else, having that conversation about what we expect from our LIHTC projects will be a wonderful opportunity. And again, I want to invite the Board of Aldermen into that conversation in the coming year. And with that, and to kick off that conversation with data and insight, I'm delighted to pass it off to Rise and to Stephen and Jess.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present this study. As Noel said, we have been working on this for several years. My name is Jess Henry. I was the project manager on this project for Rise and worked very closely with my now retired colleague and mentor, Stephen Acree. Stephen, I'll just introduce you quickly before jumping in. Stephen was our executive director at Rise for 20 years. And prior to that, he was executive director of CDA and a longtime employee of CDA. So he has very deep knowledge. And this report really gave an opportunity, great learning experience for me, but also for Stephen to share a lot of that knowledge in this kind of strategic recommendation format. So we do have a rather lengthy presentation. Do you know if that's been loaded? Hi. Okay. Let me just load that. So Noel did give a lot of the background on this, as did Chair Clark Hubbard, but this originated back in September of 2019. CDA issued an RFP, and Rise responded along with our partner firms, Lockmiller Group, that conducted the market study, and Black Arc that did the graphic design of this document. And Rise is a nonprofit community development organization. Our mission is to build stronger, more equitable St. Louis neighborhoods. And we engage in a number of activities. working towards that mission, including affordable housing development, CDFI lending, and providing capacity building and technical assistance to other organizations. We also partnered with two main groups who gave input all along the way on how we kind of framed our approach, and then all the way kind of to the end, the specific goals and proposed implementation strategy of the report. So we had an advisory group of public and private institutions and neighborhood groups, all individuals with experience in affordable housing, financing, or equal housing opportunity. And we also sought to put together a group that represented the geographic, racial, and economic diversity of the city. The final draft report you had does list and acknowledge everyone who participated. And then we also had a city housing panel. And again, this started in 2019, so along the way we changed mayoral administrations. We had, I think, 3 CDA directors who guided us throughout this process. And then representatives from SLDC, the LRA, the Affordable Housing Commission, Planning and Urban Design, the St. Louis Housing Authority, this HUD's committee members, as well as the mayor's office. So overall, our goals were to analyze, summarize, and arrive at conclusions regarding the climate or scale of affordability in the city, and then also to look at what the city of St. Louis has done historically with affordable housing resources, the impact of those investments, and to make ultimately recommendations regarding the various alternatives. And we made a very specific point of highlighting the trade-offs. This is difficult work. Funds are very limited, and so we really saw every investment as occurring at something else not being able to occur. So those trade-offs were a very important part of our framework for approaching this. So there are 2 prevailing notions in the study. The first is that affordable housing is affordable no matter who we're talking about. So whether it's rent occupied by owners or renters, that affordable housing does not cost a household more than 30% of its gross monthly income. And this is a very standard definition of affordability. And then housing is also affordable for specific reasons that have to do with the local market and the local economy and how the two fit together. So we spent a lot of time on market analysis and then creating strategies that you'll see further on in the presentation that are tied to our very kind of local economies and local submarkets. And then our 3 overarching findings are that strong, high-demand housing markets are limited to a small subset of the city. Again, that's very intuitive, just driving around. It's very obvious to see which housing markets, often obvious to see which housing markets are stronger and which are weaker. Unaffordability is largely driven by low household income levels. And finally, historical and continuing inequities undermine the potential for sustainable progress. We also know that we have experienced decades of population loss, and while this is slowed, it's still ongoing in the city. And we have very few neighborhoods that exhibit signs of strong market demand, where competition is stimulating private investment at a level that expands the supply and improves the quality of housing. And I think this committee, maybe more than any other in the city, sees case after case asking for various levels of incentives because the private market isn't really providing investment at the level needed to achieve market rate for the private market, essentially, to fill our affordable housing or regular housing needs. So with very few exceptions, housing development in the city requires public subsidies to overcome development costs. Noel also mentioned this, but in 2020, we estimated that a 2-bedroom rental unit developed without any form of subsidy would require rent of at least $1,500 a month to be financially viable. So if someone wanted to build a new multifamily building and did not want to approach the city and request any subsidy, they would need to charge at least that much per month in rent in order to build that building. And less than 70% of city renters currently pay that much. This is why the vast majority of market rate rental developments rely on one or more subsidies. We are seeing growing demand in the most sought after neighborhoods, and this is translating into rising prices and higher rents after decades of stagnation. This makes access increasingly difficult for those who cannot afford to pay those rising rents. And so kind of the point in bold on the screen is that the city needs a full, healthy housing ladder. And for us, this means that more rungs on this housing ladder would allow more households to find a good fit. So that would be the right size unit at the price they can afford. And to build that ladder, it requires two things. The first is having housing options that are sufficient to compete for and retain households who can choose to live anywhere in the region. And the second is realizing community values around inclusion, social equity, and opportunity. And so the goal of this framework is to make recommendations that will help build that housing ladder. We also found that St. Louis has one of the lowest median rents in the country for large cities, defined as a population of 250,000 or more. And so that's roughly about the same size as Tulsa, Oklahoma. And to afford that $828 per month in rent, an annual household income of $32,400 is needed. So looking at our median gross rent, median gross household, we're not alone in these challenges. Many other cities have similar median household incomes and similar rents. And median household income in the MSA is $63,705. Again, this is as of 2020. Whereas the median household income in the city is only $43,896, so just under 70% of what it is for the area. And when we look at that, we immediately see that not only is household income very low in the city compared to the region, but there's also a sharp racial income disparity within the city of St. Louis, with Black or African American households earning less than half of the income earned by white households. And that is an indication of who is more likely to experience housing cost burden in our city. The median gross rent of $828 per month is just under $10,000 a year in total rent. That's 25% of the median household income for Black or African American households. It's only 16% of the income for white households. And we also know that 20,000 households in the city live on less than $30,000 per year, and that makes it very difficult to access and maintain quality housing in healthy neighborhoods. And then another dimension is those who are living with disabilities. We have about 31,500 individuals between the ages of 16 and 64 who are not in the labor force. And a significant share of these households are on the lower end of the income ladder. For them, affordability and accessibility are linked challenges and very difficult to overcome, especially in a city with one of the country's oldest housing stocks. So we have very old housing. We have a large number of households who are not earning all that much money and then have the added burden of needing or barrier really, of needing a place to live that can accommodate their accessibility needs. So when we look at the rent and purchase capacity of households in 2020, we found that approximately 30% of all households, which is over 43,000 households, cannot afford rents over $625 a month. So this chart on the screen, if you see the box that's bracketed, anyone earning under $75,000 a year needs to find, any renter needs to find a housing unit. We have home purchasing power too, but needs to find a place to live that requires subsidy to develop. So we also found that there's an outside shortage of affordable rental units for households in the lowest income brackets. Again, this speaks to the chart, the table that Noel shared earlier. But there's an estimated shortage of 22,000 affordable rental units for households earning less than 30% of area median income, and a shortage of 10,000 affordable rental units for households earning between 30 and 50% of area median income. So again, the greatest cost burden is borne by those who have the lowest AMI, below 50% or lower area median income. Again, this isn't just an income-based disparity, it's also race-based and also has an impact on families who need a larger unit size. The wait lists for housing choice vouchers and public housing units have a combined 30,000 households on that list. And, you know, for those who can't secure a public housing unit or access one of approximately 9,500 restricted affordable housing units in the city, they're forced into a sector of the housing market that's known as NOAH, or naturally occurring affordable housing. And, you know, while there are many wonderful, naturally occurring affordable housing units in our city, this is also the sector of the market where they're more likely to encounter substandard housing conditions or predatory landlords. And we will talk about housing preservation later on. Noel also already touched on it, but you know, we have this supply, the 9,100 units I mentioned of affordable housing units that are potentially threatened by the expiration of land use restrictive agreements, LURAs, and regulatory agreements. The LIHTC minimum period of affordability is 15 years, but most developments typically have a 30-year period. But under this framework, it's important to remember that a percentage of the city's LIHTC affordable housing stock has the potential to convert to market rate housing each year. So currently, 6,848 of the city's, I say 10,030, so you know, roughly 10,000 is the number we're talking about, LIHTC units will reach the end of the 15-year compliance by 2035. And all units will reach the end of the 30-year compliance period by 2050. And Stephen, this is where I will turn it over to you.
So I hope you don't mind, but I have a little difficulty standing for a long time, so I'm going to sit down. Excuse me. So one of the things that stands out about the city's housing market is the great variability and range in the submarkets within the city. So you have parts of the city where you have homes that are $500,000 and up, and you have parts of the city where there's a lot of vacancy and abandonment, and then everything in between. So the city needs a strategy that fits the type of submarket that it's dealing with, because not all solutions are the same for different kinds of submarkets. You need to understand how the housing market works and where you're at, and sort of build the solutions for those different submarkets. So the question is, how do you do that in a way that will sort of bring some clarity to the question and devise the appropriate interventions? So we looked at a variety of factors, socioeconomic data and housing market indicators at the census tract level, with the goal of identifying these distinct submarkets, which could then be used to describe groups of neighborhoods with similar characteristics. And we very creatively then labeled those highest demand, high demand, moderate demand, low demand, lowest demand. The reason why we used that terminology is we wanted to make clear that this is an analysis based upon market demand and responsive to what the market does, because the market itself plays a huge role in how all of this works. And you can't just sort of ignore the fact that there's this big market out there that has these dynamics. You have to understand what those dynamics are, and so we wanted to make sure that we were basing our analysis on that. If you look at those, so they become clusters, and so this first map shows you those 5 different clusters, and I'll go through them individually. This is a little different than the housing market value analysis that you might be familiar with, and the city is doing another one, which is really good. It's got great information. We were looking for something that could be viewed at a little broader level so that you could start looking at it more as a sort of a neighborhood basis, rather than that sort of block by block little, 100 different colors on, in one neighborhood. So the highest demand market is the one that brackets the central corridor, probably no surprise to you. And it has a high prevalence of the large multifamily residential buildings. So this is where all the residential high-rises in the city are, really. It also has a much higher percentage of smaller units. It has the lowest owner occupancy rate of all of the submarkets, 29%, compared to 44% for the city as a whole. And it has the second highest racial diversity index in the city at 59%. There's a couple of things about this that I think they're important. One is that across the country, you generally will find that more diverse neighborhoods are more successful and have higher market value, and that is certainly indicated by this. And owner occupancy is certainly not a foolproof way of judging the value of a market. It's not at all unusual. Think about Manhattan, extremely high property values. A lot of it is not owner occupancy. And that's the same in our highest market value neighborhood. It's got low owner occupancy compared to the city as a whole. And then the next is the high demand, in which is there are areas that are adjacent to the highest demand submarket, or they're clustered in the southwest part of the city. They have a high prevalence of mid-sized multifamily, so bigger than the 4-family flat, but not high. So up to the sort of 20-unit range. So there's a higher prevalence of those in this submarket. Has a slightly lower owner occupancy level than the city as a whole, but pretty much right there as the city as a whole. And its racial diversity index is the third among the 5 submarkets, so it's right in the middle, but has disproportionately high representation of white compared to African American residents. The moderate demand submarket is scattered across the most southwestern part of the city. It has a higher prevalence of single-family homes. It has the highest owner occupancy in the city at 59%. The Racial Diversity Index ranks 4th in the city among the 5 submarkets, and disproportionately high concentration of white. Oops, I think I went the wrong way. The low-demand submarket is clustered in the southeastern portion of the city and north of the highest demand submarket you can see here. And it has a little bit lower owner occupancy than the city as a whole, but again, pretty close to the citywide average. Homeowners and with mortgages and renters have somewhat higher housing cost burdens than the city as a whole does. And it has the highest racial diversity index in the city at 66.5%. Then there's the lowest demand submarket, which is in the north end of the city, mostly north of Page, has owner occupancy similar to the city as a whole. Both homeowners, either with or without mortgages, and renters have higher housing cost burdens than the city as a whole, with renters having substantially higher housing cost burdens, and then by far the least racially diverse in the city, with a racial diversity index of 17%, so disproportionately high concentration of African Americans. Should look at each of those submarkets in terms of some other characteristics. You've got those broken out on these tables on the slide. So you can see the share of total population. And, that shows you that about 50% of the city's population lives in those low and lower demand submarkets. And the much higher percentages of the moderate and low demand submarkets have black population. We also are looking at the home values in these different submarkets and the owner occupancy. And so you can see the home sale prices and home values are pretty comparable in the highest demand market. You start to see greater disparities in those two factors when you go down. So you get to the lowest one and you have a median home value of $65,000, but the actual sale price there is $27,000. That could be very much due to distressed sales, vacant homes. Really don't know how that breaks out, but definitely a disparity between just looking at home sale prices and estimated values. Little breakout of the building permit activity. So you can see in the highest demand market where even though it is a relatively lower number of building permits, again, this is the part of the city with the most high-rise residential buildings. So you have much higher building permit value. So fewer number of permits, you get a building permit for one, 10-story building, and much higher building permit value compared to the other markets. On this one, we're looking at rental units, what the rents are, what the median renter income is, what the percentage of that is, and then what the maximum affordable rent is for those median renters. So you'll see in the higher demand markets where the percentage of income being used for the median rent is pretty reasonable, 25%, 23%, so it's well within affordability guidelines. But then when you get down to the lower end, where you have lower incomes, those percentages start to go up to where at the lowest level, the median rents are 43% the median income. That doesn't mean the rents are high, it means the incomes are low. Okay. So part of, I guess what I'm going to emphasize there is the solution to affordable housing isn't always in the development of affordable housing or the provision of assistance for affordable housing. I mean, oftentimes it is, and there needs to be good strategies for that, but there's a big part of the equation that's economic development. So, if you've got a large part of your population that makes 30% of the area median income, you have an issue with developing the income potential of that population. It can't all be solved by saying we've got to make everything affordable, because that would be extremely difficult to do, because that affordability range probably doesn't exist beyond public housing. And then the lower box is for owner-occupied units, median home value, owner income, and then a value to income ratio. And again, you see where as you go from top to bottom, homes are worth 3 times the annual income of the owners. Then going down to the bottoms, you get down to 1.7 times. So lower and lower, meaning they have a smaller portion of their wealth is in the asset of their home. And so at a certain point, when you get low home values in these neighborhoods, those homes become not necessarily an asset anymore because of the difficulty of maintaining them. The cost to maintain homes could be more than the family can afford, and so it's not doing what it should be doing for that family. Okay, going on to the report part. So this is broken down into, I haven't figured out already, the study, report, and strategy. So in the report part, we're looking at how various resources have been used by the city to preserve and produce affordable housing in that 5-year period. And we use data from CDA, the Affordable Housing Commission, SLDC, the Housing Authority, and the Missouri Housing Development Commission, with the caveat that tax abatement and tax increment financing from SLDC was only available for a 3-year period from 2017 to 19. And I wanted to mention, Noel went through this, but we did take a look in this study at those use of resources in relation to the city's consolidated plan, which the city is required to have to receive the resources it receives from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And under that consolidated plan, it has designated what are called neighborhood revitalization strategy areas under the rules governing block grant and home. You can make these designations if they're approved by HUD, and it allows you some additional flexibility under the rules with how you do things. And so that's the benefit in trying to designate areas as what we call NRSAs. And so we looked at how much of the resources were used in designated NRSAs. So the primary strategy for preserving affordable housing we found was in the home repair assistance programs, but we could not detect any strategy to preserve low-income housing tax credit, home, or project-based Section 8 units, and that becomes part of the recommendations that we make. In looking at the home repair programs, we looked at the major home repair programs during that period. CDA's Healthy Home Repair, Harambee Youth Program, and Rebuilding Together, which were both funded by the Affordable Housing Commission. And by far the largest of those programs was CDA's Healthy Home Repair Program. During this 5-year period, those programs funded 800 homeowners. It's actually 803 units to 800 owners. And you see the income breakdown there where, they were able to each reach the most low income targeting in this program, much more so than in the housing development. So 29% was with people at 30% AMI, and then going up to where 100% of the money spent on people at 80% AMI or less. CDA funded 85% of those, the Affordable Housing Commission 22%, and then there were 54 homeowners who used funds from both. In terms of geographic distribution, 10.7 million of it was in 26 neighborhoods north of Del Mar, 5 million in 37 neighborhoods south of Del Mar, and 7.6 million was in those neighborhood revitalization strategy areas. If we look at it by the market, sub-market designation, 83%, 84% of the home repair expenditures were in the low and lowest demand sub-market areas, and just around 9% in the high and highest. The Housing Authority operates 2 unfunded programs, Public Housing and Housing Choice Voucher Program. They have 2,790 public housing units in 47 developments. This is kind of interesting. 45% of those public housing units are in the high and highest demand submarkets, and 55% are in the low and lowest demand submarkets, so at opposite spectrum. It kind of makes sense if you think about where the public housing developments are located. They kind of bracket downtown in the central corridor. So those tend to be in some of the higher demand submarkets. So we looked at the money the Housing Authority spent for maintenance and improvement, and that would be money from its capital funds, and that's another type of affordable housing preservation. So in 2019, their maintenance improvement expenditures were $4.5 million, but then in addition to that, they did a major redo of LaSalle Park Village, which was 148 public housing units, $12 million, which also included some public improvements in the development. Now, the Housing Authority also administers 6,100 tenant-based and 200 Veterans Affairs supportive housing vouchers, and they spent $49 million on housing assistance payments in 2019. So, housing voucher support quickly gets very, very expensive. The Housing Authority participates in a regional approach to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So of those 6,100 vouchers, only 2,723 of those were being used in the city of St. Louis. So, people have a choice where they can use it, and they're taking their vouchers to the county and using them, or maybe somewhere else. 83% of them were being used in the low and lowest demand submarkets, the ones being used in the city. Only 12% in the high and highest demand submarkets. So what this told us is that at least to date, the city's ordinance preventing discrimination based upon source of income has not had much of an effect on where these vouchers are being used. They're still being used in the lowest demand markets. So altogether, we compiled data on the use of 19 different public sources of financing for affordable housing during the study period. CDA, Affordable Housing Commission, MHDC, and the Missouri Department of Economic Development awarded financing through loans and tax credits for 1,261 housing units and a 114-bed shelter facility. 57% were new construction, 43% rehab. 1,196 are rental units in 25 projects, so an average project size of 48 units, and 65 were homeownership units developed in 37 projects, so only an average project size of 2 units. They tend to be very small. 91% of the rental units with public financing are required to be affordable to houses that are below 80% of AMI, but a big chunk of that, you can see 89% are required to be affordable at or below 60% AMI, and that makes sense because that is generally the income requirement for housing tax credits, which is far and away the largest subsidy program for affordable housing. I mean, by several magnitudes. Affordable rental housing development projects average 4 public sources of financing, with some of them using as many as 8. And as you mentioned, that is a reflection of the difficulty in filling the cost gap to develop affordable housing in the city of St. Louis. It is not only a matter of having to stack quite a few different sources into, multi-layered financing, but it also, that added complexity adds to the cost because it requires a lot of accounting, a lot of lawyering. These are very complex projects. The city funded rental housing development program by funding source. You can see here how it breaks down for the different sources administered by city agencies. So $18 million in those 5 years, about $20,000 a unit. And then you can see this much longer list of sources administered by state agencies. $242 million, 1,100 units, $211,000 a unit. And within that, you can see that the LIHTC program is far and away the largest source of subsidy for affordable housing. So when we talk about resources, I mean, keep it in mind, the local administering agencies are doing a significant part in administering the federal funds they receive, or in case of the Affordable Housing Commission, the local funds, but they are very small piece of the pie compared to what is coming from state, administered by state agency. So it makes it really important how the city is interacting with the state and how it guides those resources. So affordable rental housing, 162 million in the 11 neighborhoods north of Del Mar, 82 million in the 8 neighborhoods south of Del Mar, and 183 and 84 million in the neighborhood revitalization strategy areas. Now, state funding for rental housing development by funding source breaks down like this: 242 million compared to 18 million. Most of those are required to be affordable at 80%, but a very large share of that is at 60% or lower. Unfortunately, though, what we see in development of affordable housing, there's very little, and Noel mentioned how they're trying to focus on the issue with improving this. Very little was being focused on how to reach people at 30% and 50% below, so that lower end of the market, which is much more difficult to do. obviously. Let's see. So 87% of the assisted affordable rental housing was was in the low and lowest demand neighborhoods, 12% in the moderate, and hardly any in the high and highest demand. Land use restriction agreements, we've mentioned these a few different times. So certain sources of financing require the use of land use restriction agreements. Low-income housing tax credits require that a land use restriction agreement be recorded against the property. Home funds require the same thing. They call them regulatory agreements. And so those do restrict those property for periods of years. And so of the 1,196 affordable rental units that were publicly financed during this period, 1,000 of them, 1,034, have their rents restricted by long-term lures and regulatory agreements. Most of them not at that very, very low income level, but the bulk of them at 60%, because again, low-income housing tax credits requires you to be affordable at or below 60% AMI. You can also do 50%. And then home also has 50 and 6% restrictions. So that's why it tends to be concentrated in those income levels. What this is showing us is sort of the burn off of those restricted units. So if nothing else would be done, of those 1,034 units, this is the number of units over time that would be leaving restriction. And so one of the recommendations is having a strategy for dealing with this, because it makes sense to us that you would try to preserve them. And then 100% of the home ownership units are affordable at 80% AMI, and they tend to be clustered at that upper end of the income spectrum, and it's a combination of home and CDBG funds mostly. And then the geographic distribution is the sort of reverse of what it is for everything else. Higher south of Del Mar than north of Del Mar, and then a pretty good percentage in the NRSA neighborhoods. So, 65 and 79% was in the low and low demand neighborhoods, but only, less than 1% in the highest demand neighborhoods. So this is homebuyer assistance. And again, 100% of homebuyer assistance is targeted to households at or below 80%, but not targeted very strongly to people at the lowest 30 and 50% level. And again, the assistance was more heavily distributed south of Del Mar than north of Del Mar. Fairly low representation in the NRSA. So the city and state combined provided $268 million in financing for 1,196 rental units, 65 for sale units, and homebuyer assistance to 81 households, and 57 of the households that were provided with homebuyer assistance were purchasing homes that also received development financing from the city. And so this is how that breaks down by funding source. So $25 million in a 5-year period for rental home ownership and homebuyer assistance. So, it's a significant amount of money, but it's about 10% of what the state does. And there's $242 million on the state side. And the state doesn't do any home ownership stuff. It's all rental. And so we want to break that down by percentages. It's, again, showing how much the tax credits are a big, big portion of the story here. I don't know why I'm getting two of them. So we also looked at the award of tax abatement on residential property for a 3-year period, 2017 to 19. Some of those properties included a commercial component, but all of the properties had residential. We did not include any properties that were just commercial. Tax abatement was awarded to 2,584 residential units in properties that also included $145,000 of commercial space. Of those, 237 units, or 9%, also received some form of city or state financing assistance. So when we talk about tax abatement, in general, most of the tax abated properties are not participating in a subsidy program from the city or state. They're just getting tax abatement. So they tend to be more sort of guided by the market. So this is where people are making investments, but going for tax abatement to make that investment work better. But, there's not any other kind of subsidy in it. This was about $607 million of development, and the abatement awards range from 2 to 20 years, with 65% being for 10 years. One of them was an outlier in that it was done as a payment in lieu of taxes of a specific amount of taxes per year of $850 per unit with a 2.5% annual increase. So they agreed up front, this is what the taxes will be for a period of time as a payment in lieu of taxes. 82% of the residential units with 15-year abatement were income and rent restricted. So that typically coincides with the first 15-year LIHTC mandatory compliance period. And of the 237 income and rent restricted units awarded tax abatement, 223, or 94%, were awarded 15-year abatements. So you can see that's a table of abatements down at the bottom there, and they cluster very heavily at the 10-year mark. The amount of tax abatement varied from 40% to 100%, and it was often scheduled as a decreasing amount of abatement over the term of the abatement. 415 of those 2,584 units awarded tax during the 3-year period received 100% abatement for any term. So the vast majority of residential properties receiving abatement did not receive 100% abatement for any period of time. And 155 or 30% were for income and rent restricted properties. And geographic distribution is kind of the opposite of what we see on subsidized development, which to us makes sense. This is where the market is being driven. In other words, it's people are making investments and asking for abatement, and that's different than subsidized development. This is mostly market rate development, so they tend to be in the area that support market rate development. Tax increment financing was approved for only one residential project in that period, and that was a $14 million TIF, for 298 units and 30,000 square feet of commercial in Developer Place. Let's see. We go on to the strategy, and the first concept that I want to talk about, and then Jess is going to take over again, is the idea of withheld property owner investment So one of the questions really is, given, the large amount of vacancy and abandonment, I mean, there's a pretty, stressed market out there. And given that, what kind of impact does that have on people being willing to make investments in property? So we created a measure for that. It's not perfect, but it's a measure to say, so compared to what people can afford, what are they actually doing? And so we quantified that for each of the markets. And for the city as a whole, that ends up to $647 million in withheld investment. So there's a lot out there that people are not doing because of low confidence in the market. If they had greater confidence in the market, perhaps they would spend a larger share of their income to invest in it. That's really what that means. So as a weak market city, the challenge for the St. Louis isn't just inadequate resources, but how inadequately leveraged confidence sufficient to mobilize property owners to reinvest money they already have. I forget, is this you or me? That's my last slide. Okay, this is my last slide. You're probably happy. So if we look at building permits issued in each of the census tracts, we see a significant shortfall in measurable impact. Housing program, the shortfall in those expenditures isn't surprising, given the location of 86% of the expenditures in the low and lowest demand submarkets. So on the one hand, there's a desire to invest heavily in the most distressed areas. On the other hand, that tends not to create much leverage in terms of market impact. Doesn't get you a lot of change. Another way to gauge impact is the relative concentration of affordable housing units by submarket, recognizing that incomes are lower and poverty rates higher in the low and lowest demand submarkets. So do I go through these charts, Jess, or do you? I do, okay. And I don't know, do you know why my screen is doing this? Sorry. I don't know, anyway, okay. Because I really want to see this stuff. Okay. So you can see home repair programs are heavily concentrated in the lowest markets. The homebuyer, affordable home ownership development is a little more evenly spread, but still pretty much of it in the demand submarkets here. Homebuyer assistance, better. It's spread across more of the different types of submarkets. This is affordable rental housing, very highly concentrated in those lower end markets. And low-income housing tax credit, rental housing, the same thing, very heavily concentrated in those lower end markets. But tax abatement, kind of the reverse, where you see it heavily concentrated in the higher end market. And we believe that there are understandable reasons for it. Public housing is an interesting case because, again, it's at the opposite end of the spectrums. It's those areas that bracket the corridor. Housing choice vouchers, again, though, still heavily concentrated in the lower end markets. So now it's Jess's turn. Thank you.
I'm actually going to sit down as well so I can see the screen a little better. Thank you. Okay, so we just presented a lot of information. That's everything we looked at before we could even start saying, how do we form a strategy to address this? And so right when we started to guide our strategy, we felt it was important to create a set of principles that we were going to use to guide any strategic recommendations around how decisions should be made. So the first one's a little obvious, but resources are very limited. And so we felt that they should be guided by intentional strategies. It shouldn't just be from NOFA to NOFA, administration to administration, but that there should be some kind of cohesive strategic platform. And for decades now, the federal program rules for CDBG and home funds have really driven the city's housing and community development investments. And again, guided by that 5-year consolidated plan that's been mentioned right now, there hasn't been a ton of strategic intention built into that plan. And I know Noel mentioned how this time around, he's going to look at that a little differently and use that opportunity to build in some strategies aimed at sustainable progress and the various submarkets that we just looked at. So our 5 principles that we came up with, and Noel mentioned these as well, I'm going to go through each one and just kind of share how we defined them in the study. So the first one is focused, and that means deconcentrating limited resources over wide area. So when you deconcentrate our very limited resources over a wide area, it reduces their impact. So we recommend moving to a very targeted, kind of well-defined investment strategy. So that'll accomplish several things. First, it'll show where investments are being made specifically and allow it to be studied a little better. And we should be able to start picking up on, if we stick to this long enough, visible indications about the community and neighborhood improvements in real time, what the impacts are. A focused guiding principle also builds a foundation for growing investor confidence. Stephen talked about that withheld investment. We know that a lot of people who do have resources are reluctant to invest in the city of St. Louis. When you have to make a decision about an improvement in your own home, you consider what your neighborhood is like, what's happening, and whether or not, building that new garage or adding an addition or doing major systems upgrades are going to pay off when it's time to sell that house. And so, knowing that everyone makes, kind of rational decisions around investing, we want to grow investor confidence, which in turn increases market demand. And then finally, a focused strategy platform leverages resources geographically for increased impact. So you'll see that our proposed strategies, we propose investment across all of the 5 submarket types. We believe that investment's needed everywhere in the city, but that the strategies have to be aligned to the market conditions found in those various submarkets in order to maximize impact. The second principle is asset-based. Noel spoke to this as well, and we agree with him on how that's defined. It's looking at neighborhood assets and investing around them to yield a stronger return at a faster rate. The next one is inclusive. So we know that our city has deeply ingrained racial, ethnic, income, and disability divides, and a large percentage of our residents lack access to healthy and vibrant neighborhoods. And a city that continues those patterns and doesn't change those trends is unlikely to prosper long term. That city will continue to be socially and financially stressed and won't really ever be able to generate the kind of investment needed to make it competitive. The fourth principle is resiliency. Moving market dynamics takes time. So for us, resiliency is really focused on having a patient strategy that allows time to gauge whether or not specific policy initiatives are effective, whether or not specific types of investment are generating the impact that was desired at the outset. And then finally, our fifth principle is driven by neighborhood planning. We know that in the last several years, the city has really started talking about neighborhood plans, the role of neighborhood planning, how we can engage, knowing that we have a very old comprehensive plan that doesn't really reflect current desires, trends, land use patterns, et cetera, found across the city now. So neighborhood planning also helps move us away a little from our over-reliance on external resources. So we're talking about that CD, home, LIHTC, the stuff that we don't really control. We want to influence it, but as far as, the largest resource that goes into affordable housing development, the low housing tax credit, really the city has limited influence there. It's a state level tool. So neighborhood planning can help the city participate more meaningfully in those conversations at the state level of where resources are going and where residents would like them to go. So with those 5 principles in mind, we came up with 3 citywide strategy recommendations. So the very first one is alignment of strategy across city function. So we know, St. Louis is a very large, complex city. We have CDA, who, has sponsored this report, SLDC, the Affordable Housing Commission, the Housing Authority, and others. And that spreads responsibility for developing, maintaining, furthering affordable housing across multiple departments. And so under our alignment of strategy across city functions, we recommended that the city create a new position for city housing director that can help marshal and oversee all of the city's investments, whether it be at SLDC, CDA, the Housing Commission, someone who can, make sure that all departments are speaking, collaborating, and fully aligned on the city's affordable housing policy. We also recommend resource coordination. So right now, every agency within the city or department that has its own resource puts out its own NOFA, independent of other, funding timelines, including the MHDC's LIHTC application cycles. And so to develop, I think we said, the average number of sources in an affordable housing development are 4, but they can go up to 8. That's because as an affordable housing developer, you have to go to each individual agency and ask for a piece of their, share of their resources to go into your capital stack to get that done. And so aligning that would help the city better understand where it's investing and what types of developments, how those align with policy goals. And it would also help developers just, make the process a little easier. And then we also talk about, under this alignment of strategy, programmatic standardization. So the best example of this that we found in analyzing the data was with homebuyer assistance. If you receive homebuyer assistance from CDA, you get one amount. If you receive it from the Affordable Housing Commission, you get a different amount. Sometimes homes are built on the opposite side of the street, but home buyers will have received a different amount of home buyer assistance. So it really does play into, what Noel called the lottery earlier, of just depending which pot of funding you happen to, get your subsidy from, you might end up with more or less than your neighbor across the street. And so programmatic standardization can kind of help level that out, smooth that out for residents, and just make sure that, we're giving, treating everyone fairly. Our second broad citywide strategy recommendation was to create a citywide property registry. This is really aimed at the rental housing stock within the city. It could be expanded to include vacant buildings as well. But essentially, we're looking for an effective way to track the number and condition of rental units in the city. Believe it or not, we don't really know that. You know, we know there are a lot of substandard units, but we can't tell you the exact amount. We can't tell you what's making them substandard. We can't even really tell you the cost of rents per unit. That's not really information that's collected. We're going to public sources of data, and we're coming up with numbers that seem to fit, but we're not collecting that information from landlords who are renting out the units. It's not part of something that they fill out on their inspection paperwork or anything like that. So a rental property registry would, it seems really cumbersome. It would give the opportunity for the city to interact more frequently or in better ways with both good and bad landlords. So you could really start to see who's maintaining units well, who's keeping things up to code, and maybe create policy, create ways where maybe, they have a lower inspection fee over time. So, conversely, for landlords who proved themselves to be, not great landlords, you could start developing programs that are, more of a stick than a carrot for them. So this is a way that, would allow the city greater influence both in our subsidized affordable housing, our capital A affordable housing stock, but also that naturally occurring affordable housing that is by far the greatest share of our market and that we know very little about, but that we, all hear about and experience from, our neighbors, friends, family who, have had to deal with some deplorable housing conditions in the city. And then our final general strategy recommendation is for affordable housing preservation. We've talked about this quite a bit, but we are potentially going to lose a proportion of our low-income housing tax credit housing stock annually. And we also know that in neighborhoods, speaking to that naturally occurring affordable housing market, we also know that there are neighborhoods where the market is growing and naturally occurring affordable housing opportunities may be lost just through market forces there. So preservation could also look at how do we get more affordable housing in those neighborhoods where that's happening. That gets into a more specific submarket recommendation, and so we did come up with 10 recommendations that are tied to specific submarkets. We don't really have a history of this, but we think it's important to start thinking this way. So the 10 market-dependent strategy recommendations, again, I'll go through each quickly. The first is residential property tax abatement. We think that this should be used to increase housing investment as a market-building strategy in the low and lowest demand submarkets, and then as a means to increase access to moderate, high, and highest demand submarkets for lower income households. So, we think tax abatement offers a real opportunity to get affordable housing in submarket areas where it just doesn't exist in high volumes, high concentrations today. The second is inclusionary housing requirements. So in almost every city that utilizes inclusionary housing policies, there's a recognition that an affordable housing unit is a public good, that with every affordable housing unit created, you are creating a public good. And that has to be paid through either cash subsidies or cost offsets. So inclusionary housing requirements recognize really that the areas where new market rate housing is most likely to occur are noticeably wealthier and wider than those where demand is weaker and where affordable housing developments have historically been concentrated. And so just saying, hey, we're going to set aside, if you build in this submarket, strong submarket of the city, and you are requesting subsidy, set aside 5 or 10% or whatever discrete number the city thinks should be the policy. Set those aside as dedicated affordable housing. Let's expand affordable housing in our stronger submarket areas. The next is very similar, linkage fees. So linkage fees would be, where a developer is seeking tax abatement or tax increment financing, but including an inclusionary housing requirement, it's not feasible for some reason. It just doesn't make sense. You could say, fine, if you can't have those additional set-aside units in your building, your property can't accommodate them for whatever reason, pay into a fund to help us build them elsewhere. So that's what a linkage fee is. You're not doing it on your property with this development, but you're willing to contribute to it elsewhere. Our fourth recommendation was creating an affordable housing trust fund project-based housing voucher. Our example for this was actually a program in Chicago that we found that was having a great deal of success. As we showed earlier, we don't have a huge amount of local investment in affordable housing. The vast majority of resources come from outside of the city. But we also know that we desperately need to house more folks earning, especially at 30% or below AMI. It's very difficult to develop new units for that specific income bracket. But if the Affordable Housing Commission created a trust fund voucher, even if they said we're going to start with 50 or 100 vouchers or some number, that's just immediately 50 or 100 or however many families at that income bracket that they can house. And they could partner. So in the Chicago example, they partnered with affordable housing or market rate housing operators and said, hey, can we project base these to your building? So we're going to guarantee, you give us 10 units, we'll, bring families to you who have this voucher in hand. Rent is pretty much guaranteed to get paid, and we have a place to direct people because they're tied to a building. Unlike a housing choice voucher that's portable, these would be project-based and tied to developments. It's also a really great way then to tie to increase affordable housing in the stronger market areas. So if you have like a really nice market rate building going in, maybe it's a combination of subsidy to get that set aside and saying, well, we can bring families to you who are going to have this local voucher in hand that we set up the programmatic rules and constraints for, manage, oversee, and we can bring these families to you to house. So and it was very interesting when we found that case study, and we thought it would really well in St. Louis. The fifth one is an affordable housing community land trust. So again, we thought a lot about how to expand inclusiveness in high demand submarkets or neighborhoods that are adjacent to high sub-demand markets. And so we thought that publicly owned vacant land in these places would represent an opportunity to leverage assets for future affordable rental or home ownership housing opportunities. So a land trust could be established within the city's current land bank to accept property donations or to secure tax foreclosed properties, or just go out and acquire properties through just, purchasing of land, and then to kind of preserve that in the moderate, high, and highest demand submarkets for new affordable housing. We saw in the moderate demand submarket, there's very little affordable housing. And so that would be, a great way for the city to kind of earmark land to get new affordable housing in those areas. The sixth was assisted affordable housing development. We've talked extensively, the city already does a lot of this. We're just recommending ways to tie it to these submarket conditions. So we think it should be undertaken in coordination with and guided by neighborhood planning, with the expressed goal of creating mixed income communities and reducing racial segregation across the city. And so in the low and lowest demand submarkets, the subsidized financing of affordable housing development, it should be sustained long-term implemented at scale, and geographically focused to work as a market building strategy. So we still think it is very important to continue investing primarily through low-income housing tax credit developments in the lowest demand submarkets. But the development should be located near community assets in areas adjacent to higher demand submarkets or adjacent to home repair and other investments the city is already making. In the moderate demand submarket, assisted affordable housing should aim to stabilize the weaker blocks throughout neighborhoods and increase access for lower income households. And then in the high and highest demand submarkets, we recommend that assisted affordable housing development be focused in areas adjacent to the low and lowest demand submarkets, again, to kind of bolster those market building strategies. Our seventh recommendation, strategic recommendations around home repair assistance. So in the low and lowest demand submarkets, we think this should be undertaken in coordination with and guided by neighborhood planning. Home repair is very difficult because you have these very long lists of people who wait years and years for their turn to come up. And so if you shift to a more strategic market building strategy where you say we want to focus on areas, you're going to exclude people who live outside of the area that's focused. That's why we think it's really important that this be done in conjunction with neighborhood planning efforts, because those are decisions that communities should have a say in and should get to weigh in on where they think within their community it makes sense to focus, and how to put together a program that doesn't say you're left out indefinitely. It says for now, we're going to focus on this area to use this as a tool to increase property values and turn these homes into greater assets. So the next time around, you might be able to go to the bank and get a loan to conduct these repairs instead of simply getting back on the city's list because you still can't afford to maintain your home and it still doesn't have enough value. It's still not enough of an asset for you to make those repairs again when they come up, because we know, systems need to replace systems and roofs and tuck pointing and all the things that come with all homes, but especially our older housing stock. This isn't a one-time fix for a family. This is something that they need over and over again. So focusing these activities in areas with more intact blocks, near community assets, and adjacent to higher sub-demand submarkets will hopefully grow those, strengthen those hyper-local block-by-block areas to the point where they don't need it in the future, and you can move on and help someone else, help another focus area. All right, our eighth recommendation is around enhanced rental property code enforcement. We think that this one is really important, and it really builds on work that's already being done by the city in recent years. But combining increased code compliance program with the rental registry that we proposed earlier would really help identify landlords that are operating substandard properties. So, you really need that local kind of NIS, neighborhood improvement specialist perspective. They're the ones who really know what's happening day to day in neighborhoods, who the good landlords are, who the bad landlords are, what people need. And so, this is another opportunity to proactively reward good landlords and to take a firm, consistent stand against negligent property owners. Ultimately, through this combined enhanced code enforcement and the rental registry, the city could foster a culture of voluntary compliance that results in safer, healthier neighborhoods. Number 9 is a small rental property improvement loan program. So we thought a lot about this portion of the housing market that we don't really know a lot about, the naturally occurring affordable housing. You saw all of our data was about existing public investments, but we have very little data about what is happening in the naturally occurring affordable housing market. We thought one thing that we noticed is that there's a lack of programs and resources available to encourage healthy small property businesses to encourage them to become healthier, more sustainable, to develop an operating model that's beneficial to residents and to the city. And so we thought the city could support these landlords as small business owners by developing or supporting small rental property improvement financing programs in the low and moderate demand submarkets. So there are probably a lot of landlords out there, property owners, who have really good intentions. They don't want to be bad landlords, but they lack the resources to invest as well in their properties. They might be over leveraged. It might not be in a strong enough market that they can go out and get a conventional loan. So that might be an area where the city, has that carrot to help them become better landlords, and that ultimately benefits those residents, their tenants, by improving the standard of housing that those tenants live in. And it also, strengthens the small business of that person operating as a landlord. And we need more good landlords in the city. So this program is really aimed at encouraging that. The final one is a neighborhood improvement fund. So we know that this one as well, we want it to be guided by neighborhood planning. We know that there are areas of the city that are very difficult to invest in a way that results in trackable, visible impacts. But we still need to do something in those areas of the city. There are still things that can be done to improve the day-to-day quality of life of residents and to keep those residents engaged and treated respectfully as members of our community who also deserve to share in resources and have a voice in the decisions being made that impact their day-to-day quality of life. So we're proposing a fund that would allow community members to indirect investments that over time maybe boost market strength and create those conditions where they're ready for the next level of investment. In order to do that, you'd have to keep eligible activities as broad as possible and really let the communities dictate and choose what needs to be done. So this would support a wide range of quality of life projects. So it could be physical improvements, arts improvements, deepening connection and understanding in the sense of community amongst those communities. It could be, there are any number of things. So we see this as a pot of fund that can be used for broad uses, but that is very heavily driven by community planning, by the neighborhoods themselves, and not so much by, high barriers like going through a NOFA process, having to be a sophisticated developer or social service agency. More, how do you get people involved as residents to show that their voices are meaningful too, that we want to hear, and that that the city wants to respond and provide resources to them as well, even if they're living in a place with very weak market conditions that don't support other types of major investment. So these projects could be initiated, planned, and carried out by community members for the benefit of the neighborhood, or again, to make it as accessible as possible, they could draw on the city's technical expertise and resources in carrying out public improvements. So maybe it's something that they really need, like sidewalks to, access a public amenity, or something that's really, comes up again in conversations. Those residents obviously can't be, they can't go build a sidewalk, but they could rely on the city's technical expertise to still get that thing that's very important to them accomplished. So that's kind of how we envision that strategy. Obviously, the caveat with all of these are broad recommendations. We're not building, programs. We're not building new application forms. There's a lot for the city to still figure out here across the various departments. But these are meant to, I think, help guide those conversations and help all of the city staff and elected officials decide, prioritize and decide, how and which parts of these strategy recommendations they want to pursue. And then, logically, what does it take then to carry out these activities? So I know this was a very long presentation. We're at the end now. I think we're happy to answer questions. Noel is here as well to answer questions on the portion he presented. And again, I just thank you for your time. I know this has been a very long meeting, so thank you for hearing our entire presentation. Oh, and Stephen.
I just wanted to add one thought, which is, when we talk about some of these strategies, particularly the ones that are based upon how to target geography and making things like, in this kind of market, you want to do that in the areas that are adjacent to the strengths or adjacent to a stronger market. There's really two ways that can be done. There's a passive way to do it, which is that you describe those things. So you put out a request for proposals and you describe that. You say, so we want to concentrate something in these kinds of areas. Another more active way to do it is you actually specifically say, these are the areas that we're looking at that meet those criteria. I would argue that it is much more effective to try to do it as much as possible in that second one than leaving it up to people to try to figure out what you want.
Thank you so much. I want to applaud you all for the work you've done, and thank you. I know you mentioned that this was time and lengthy, but I think it was absolutely time well spent. I think it was important for us to not just receive this in our mailboxes, but to have it here captured, to be able to share with our colleagues and live and use it to implement it. The resilience that you talked about in the report is important, and that takes time, right? And then we are elected to do that. This is not a favor, right? We are elected. This is our job, to sit and listen and gather this information, this wisdom, and take it as we move forward as a body with these strategies. And I'll just mention that out of the 10, I always get excited when I see the number, but out of the 10 that you mentioned, a number of them, the majority of them, actually, former Alderman Rhodey mentioned to me on the conversation that we had this morning. So just to know that the data reflected the vision that you all were thinking about 3-4 years ago, and now it's reflecting that in the report. It just speaks to it just shows rather that the consensus was there then, and it'll hopefully still be here now to be able to implement this. So with that, thank you all, right, for the time that you all have spent. I'm going to open it up to see if my colleagues have any questions that they have, and then what I am sure of is that you all may receive questions after this because of either colleagues having to leave or colleagues watching that might have some questions that they want to ask as well. So with that, I'll open it up. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of the time and effort that went into this. I think overarching thing that really stood out to me was the coordination between the various city departments that all deal with this. And you had proposed a specific person to or specific job that you would like to see as one of the things that the city could do. Can you talk a little bit more about that role and where you imagine it to sit? Hi. I didn't see. I thought you left. There you are.
There's been a new role created at SLDC, a citywide housing strategist. That's Dylan Holliam, who I introduced briefly when he was here. His role is really to align the work of the city departments. Until you have more fundamental structural change of city government, it's really difficult to imagine a single person literally kind of in charge of every city housing department, because that's not how our city government is set up. The building division is within the Department of Public Safety and plays an essential role in our city housing process. In fact, one of the recommendations of the RISE report, the rental registry, would have to be implemented by the building division, and it's hard to imagine a single individual being responsible both over that aspect of housing as well as CDA, as well as the Affordable Housing Commission, as well as SLDC, et cetera, et cetera. However, deeper alignment, regular meetings, that work is happening. And at CDA, we're very pleased to play part of that role in coordinating, as we do have contractual relationships with all these city departments. The Affordable Housing Commission, per its enabling statute ordinance, brings its recommendations to CDA for approval before finalizing them. SLDC's investments in affordable housing are typically pursuant to contracts with CDA, and we see those as well before they're finalized. So we're happy to, at CDA, play an element of that coordinating role, and that new position of the citywide housing strategist is also essential towards that deeper alignment of city departments.
So we mentioned several times how big a piece of the pie the state is in all of this. And one of the things that I think is important for whatever that position is that it's a person who is designated and it's understood by the state that that person can be in regular communication with the Missouri Housing Development Commission staff to really promote the city's priorities and explain to them what the city's strategy is and develop that relationship over time, which I think would make a difference, because it's much different if you have that kind of strategy than just responding to whether or not you support a particular application. You're really kind of upfront trying to communicate to the state what your priorities are, what your longer term strategy is. And I think that kind of position could do that.
That's a great point, Stephen. And jumping off of that, I'll share that the past 2 years we have invited MHDC to the regular LIHTC bus tour, something that happened previously to COVID. Now we've restarted that. And as a result of those conversations and those relationships that have developed between, in particular, CDA staff and MHDC staff, because we have very parallel jobs, CDA basically MHDC for the city. But throughout the development agencies, we're working actually currently on a memorandum of understanding between CDA and the city and MHDC, in particular pertaining to projects which are jointly funded with both city funds and MHDC funds, so that we don't duplicate the environmental review, Davis-Bacon, and other compliance processes.
Thank you. I can imagine that would be a very difficult job to coordinate all of the different efforts that exist in the city, and I think that's kind of been pointed out at one of the problems is that what that leads to in terms of fragmentation and difference in programming and all very interesting stuff. I'm going to limit myself to 3 questions, even though I wrote down more, and I'm sure I could think of more. One of the things that really stood out to me as well was the amount of money that is looked at as sort of foregone investment that's not happening in the city due to low market confidence. I certainly am, from a personal experience, own a home and think about, okay, well, how much would I need to, if I was going to build another bathroom, or what would that return look like? You kind of think through that and how it affects to you. And I live in one of the moderate areas. I want to ask what could be done to increase confidence in the market, but my guess is the list is about 100 million things long, and it involves safety issues and population decline and everything like that. But, if you were to say, this is the number one thing that St. Louis needs to do to increase confidence in our market, I mean, what is that, and how much of a role the Board of Aldermen could and should have?
I'll give you my thought on that, which is just committing to a strategy. And that's part of the whole resilience part of this, which is the issue there is that you make visible that you actually are concentrating resources and people see something happening. Because, what happens in neighborhoods, I'll give the analogy, and some people will like this, some people won't, but 20 years ago, we were asked to help the Forest Park Southeast neighborhood, which at that time was really not in good shape. I mean, there were a lot of problems there. And so we went in and helped the neighborhood buy up, it was 30-something really poorly managed, poorly maintained rental properties, and then converted like a dozen of them into homeownership, but the others kept as affordable, did completely rehabs on them. But doing something at that concentrated manner that was all in a 3x4 block area, we immediately saw people in the neighborhood starting to invest in their homes, and that started momentum. And so when people see visible change, that starts to lead confidence, and that's why it's so important to have focused strategies. But just committing to a strategy, long-term, focusing, is probably the most important thing that you can.
That's really interesting. Did you want to add? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I will just add that, we presented a lot of data. We know the average person isn't diving into, all of their neighbors' assessments, their assessments, doing, analysis of how strong their neighborhood is before making a decision. But just as Stephen said, if you see your neighbor building a garage or putting in new windows, you start thinking, oh, I feel a little more comfortable that myself now because it's happening around me. So I think it's just, generating enough of that at a level where it really starts building confidence. And that happens really block by block, which is where some of these strategies, focusing them, can make a pretty quick impact if you stick with that strategy over a long enough period of time.
I completely agree, and all I'll add is that I think you can see that exact process beginning to play out currently, or having played out in the West End, in Benton Park West, in Tower Grove East, and other geographies of the city. And if you look at our map over there, you'll see high concentrations, block by block, of CDA housing investments. I think in particular on Cabany in the West End, we recently were taking some HUD folks on a bus tour, and it was wonderful to see right by the 5 new construction homes that had recently been completed, there were 3 other homes under construction on that same block, and it was just great to see.
I have so many more questions from that question, but I'm going to limit myself. This is very, very fascinating to me. My last question that I'll go with, one of the big concerns that I have in my neighborhoods, and I think across the whole city, is purchase of vacant homes or just purchase of homes from out-of-state LLCs, people who are acquiring dozens, if not hundreds, of properties across the city of St. Louis, which has really led to a lot of destabilization, I think, in the city and probably further. And I didn't really hear us talk too much about that. And I was interested in how that affects what we're looking at in terms of the market, in terms of affordable housing development, in terms of the future for some of these neighborhoods that have a high percentage of properties that fall into this category.
So I think one of the important issues there is providing capital to the neighborhood-based nonprofits, the CDCs, the community development agencies, so that they can act quickly to acquire those kinds of properties, but they have to be capitalized to do that. And a typical source for them to perhaps get that, because it's not all that easy for them necessarily to go to the bank every time, but getting a line of credit with a community development financial institutions. So if the city could find ways to help capitalize CDFIs, which they can, then those CDFIs, which are community-based, community-oriented, nonprofit, they can create partnerships with local CDCs that may enable them to act more quickly in those cases, instead of, basically they're watching this happen around them and they know it's happening too, but they don't have the resources to step in.
Thank you so much. I will email the rest of my questions unless you wanted to ask something.
I'll just add
Okay.
one thing to that. One of the areas or programs where we've seen success lately in addressing that is with the work Legal Services of Eastern Missouri is doing with getting some of those vacant buildings back. And then they very quickly turn them over. They work with the local CDCs to get them in hands of somebody who can redevelop them as part of a larger affordable housing development. But their capacity is limited and constrained as well, and so they're not really able to do it and it takes time. They're not able to do it at a scale where they're delivering like a full suite of vacant buildings within a reasonable sized geography that can quickly become a development application seeking, low-income housing tax credit, for example. So I think, building on the work they're doing, kind of bolstering it through other programs, but ultimately, as Stephen said, helping get these groupings of buildings, because it's really difficult to get and hold on to real estate for as long as it takes to get a LIHTC development funded, built, and occupied.
Right.
You're going out at risk. I'm sorry. If you're going to be willing to acquire a property, you're going out at risk at that point. You've got money out the door, but you don't yet have probably any commitments for how you're going to deal with that property. So there's got to be a source of money that's going to be relatively risk tolerant in order to do that.
A final tool that I'll add in response to your question, Alderwoman, is the private building stabilization program that we're piloting with the building division. And I think that that's a really exciting new tool that the city has developed to go after irresponsible landlords and speculators, because essentially what it allows us to do is, with the city councilor's problem properties unit, notify these irresponsible landlords that their property's not up to code, that the city is going to act to bring it up to code should they fail to bring it up to code by a given date, and then to bill the owner for that work that the building division conducts, at which point the owner has a choice: either pay the price that it took to bring the property up to code, or give up the property, in which case it goes to tax sale. I'll also note that that applies to vacant buildings, but it also applies to vacant lots and outstanding forestry fees and other city fees. And in fact, there's millions of dollars in outstanding fees, but it does take time and labor, in particular on the part of the city councilor's office and the collector of revenue's office, to bring that special tax sale process to bear on these problem landlords.
Thank you very much for taking the time to answer my questions. I'm very grateful for the work of the building stabilization that's occurring in my ward, and legal services is working in a few neighborhoods in my ward, and it really has made a huge difference. So thank you very much for your time again.
I had some of the exact same notes Alderwoman Schweitzer had, so I'm glad you asked that question. We're just gonna, speaking of what she said, I know it's gonna break, I believe rather it's gonna break the whole Silo St. Louis cycle that we go through with the work that we're doing collectively here. And I did want to mention that the brother's name that has that position in SLDC is I think Dillion. Is it pronounced Dilly? Dylan Hollium with SLDC is the housing strategist that was just hired for SLDC. So definitely reach out to him as well with your questions. Alderman Brownie.
Thank you, all of you, and thanks to Mr. Avery too. I sat down with you for the election, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And this report is incredible. It's just clearly a monumental amount of work went into it. It's a grounded understanding of St. Louis and all the different pieces, how they all work together. I think this is going to really help us move forward, and so I really appreciate all of you. I also want to say thank you to those who I was supposed to meet with half an hour ago, and appreciate them waiting for me while we finish up this meeting, because this is all incredible stuff, and I think it's been worth it to sit here and get all this information. I was curious if you had an understanding of how demolition programs of the past few decades have impacted the housing supply in the city.
My first thought on it is that we are living with the legacy of demolition programs that did not clean fill what was demolished, and that simply packed everything into the foundation. And what that does and what that means is that the excavation costs that we now face on most of our housing production projects are extremely elevated. They should be in the order of 10 to 15,000. They can often go as high as 50 or 60,000. And so that's something where, moving forward, it's really important that the demolition that is done, for example, that LRA is currently undertaking a demolition program funded through the Department of Economic Development with the Regional Crime I forget the name of the organization, but I believe it's the Regional Crime Association, that the demolition that is conducted is clean fill, where the actual debris is disposed of properly. Does that answer your question at all? That seems like an indirect impact.
Somewhat. I think it to the idea that some housing has to be demolished, but that when they do it improperly, it actually limits our ability to build new housing in the future. That is helpful and something I hadn't really thought about as I dig through my own backyard sometimes and find like bricks and metal and all sorts of things that shouldn't be there. I live in Forest Park Southeast. I moved there in 2012. So I've seen the tail end of the investment and the strategy that has gone into it. And to be clear, it's still happening. It's still underway. But I have seen a lot of market rate housing get built in the neighborhood in the past several years, and I've seen a lot of pushback against that. Meanwhile, though, rents have continued to rise in the city, and as we've added units in that neighborhood, we've seen something interesting happen. Rents have been fairly stable. So I was wondering if you could speak to the construction of market rate housing and how that impacts the availability of affordable housing.
Well, actually, Forest Park Southeast is a good example where, whether you think it was the best or not, there was a conscious strategy for moving from the lower end of the market, affordable, to building the market there. And then it switched, and we were there for that whole period where, when we first went into the neighborhood and we're helping the neighborhood group, it was definitely at a real low point. Values were extremely low. To then, near the tail end when we were there, it was a matter of how do you maintain affordability or reach that balance so that it can maintain sort of a mixed income quality, which compared to where redevelopment has happened in most of the city, it's actually been done pretty well there. There's a good mix of market rate and affordable housing in Forest Park Southeast. But it is true, people see the higher end market rate housing and they kind of get concerned about that. But you want to allow for that to happen. The city needs to have that too. And so I think it's a matter of being intentional about it so that, let's say we want this much affordable housing and try to encourage that at the same time that you're creating an environment where people want to invest in that. And, there's absolutely no way it's ever going to be perfect, but it's better to have it be intentional and have it happen than, there's plenty of places where it's just been up to the market and the market has pushed out the lower end of the market and that's kind of it. And that's not really what has happened in Forest Park Southeast.
If I may expand on that, I think what your question is getting at is when you build market rate housing, does that help preserve affordable housing? Is that a fair interpretation? And I think from a pure kind of supply and demand logic, the answer is that expanding the supply of market rate housing reduces demand for the kind of, you could imagine a situation when there's no market rate housing where all the tenants are competing over the affordable housing, right? And so expanding the supply of market rate housing does presumably stabilize prices for naturally occurring affordable housing as well. Something I'll add, however, and that's a policy decision at CDA that I welcome any feedback or input on, is that when I started at CDA, historically CDA did support and subsidize the development of market rate homes, for sale homes. And just given the extraordinary need that we see here, and that's not eligible under home, but it is eligible under CDA and eliminating blight. And just given the extraordinary need and the limited resources that we have, reached a policy decision with our team that we're going to focus our resources on affordable housing, because that also has the same effect in terms of expanding the supply of affordable housing and stabilizing prices.
I also want to emphasize that in most parts of the city, the development of affordable housing is raising the market. The affordable housing that's developed is higher value, higher quality. So affordable housing is often used, at Forest Park Southeast is a good example, but there's parts of the West End where this has been done. There's a Gate District where this strategy was used, where the affordable end of the market was the beginning, and it drove that market to be a viable market to invest in because it almost inevitably is higher value and better than what was there before.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for the answer. It's helpful to understand how this is all related and understanding the need to build housing, attract people to our city, including people who are higher income earners. We can't build an entire city out of affordable housing, and that wouldn't be something we could run a city off of. So it's important to build all those types, but to understand programs like RETAF that helps people stay in place when they watch the rest of their neighborhood go up. I mean, I talk to people in the neighborhood that have lived there since the 70s, and I can't imagine what they've seen. So it is astounding to me that we've made this progress, but it's important to make sure that we benefit everyone from that progress.
I moved to Lafayette Square in 1978, so believe me, that's been a trajectory.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm just so deeply appreciative of all the work you've done. I mean, just Mr. Avery, your legacy alone is incredible. I know you don't do it for your legacy, but it is. The last question I have is just about the report and the recommendations about inclusionary housing requirements and linkage fees. They're kind of like an either-or situation. The conclusion in the report, and I've lost the page now, but the conclusion in the report was that it would make a minor dent in the affordable housing supply. One concern I've had whenever I think about inclusionary zoning is that we are a city that is separated from a county that is also across the river from an entirely different state. And if we were to put restrictions on and requirements on what developers had to do in the city, they might as well just go a couple miles east or west and build there. Is there a danger to that in what we're calling a weak market city? Is there a danger that we could chase development away by creating too high of a linkage fee or an inclusionary housing requirement?
Yeah, I definitely think there is, which is why we tried to draw that very narrowly, so that in only these cases of the highest demand market, if you're going to do incentives, could you consider doing inclusionary housing or a fee instead. But I think you have to be very careful with it because it is it's a very fragile market. I'll say that. It's like even the higher end of the market is, I know people like to think developers are making millions of dollars, but it's a risk. It's still a big risk, and there's lots of money at risk. And so you have to be very careful and sensitive and take it slowly.
And I do want to note that the report did say that a feasibility study is the next recommended step. It didn't say just go. So I do appreciate that. Again, this is just an incredible piece of work, and I'm very grateful to everyone included. I know that there's several people who worked on this, but only a few of them are in the room today. But I do appreciate all the work that went into this. So thank you again, and I know we've been here long enough, so I'll finish my questioning.
I told you were going to get more questions later. Yeah, and I just want to, hey, if there's no place you could have better been than in a meeting like this before you meet with that champion back there that you're going to meet with, Sunny Hutton, in quality of life of affordable housing and the work she does. So you're in the perfect place, Alderman Brown. So with that, we'll move. Did we have any written testimony?
We had over 40 written testimonies supporting Board Bill 129.
Great, and they're in the drive.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm sure we probably don't have any announcements. We were all present. So no excused members. I will accept the motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I'm sure we have previous row. Thank you so much. Everyone have a blessed day.
Thank you.